Hey there, tonight we're diving into the eyebrow-raising world of ancient Chinese hygiene practices, where the reality is, sometimes being clean involved fermented rice and insect innards. What you're about to discover might just make you grateful for modern soap. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the vibrant chaos of 16th century China, when emperors were busy playing chess with entire territories, the everyday life of women was a curious mix of rituals and routines that might make a modern spa enthusiast clutch their serum bottle just a little tighter. Take skincare, for instance. Today, we might fret over a little benzoyl peroxide, but back then, women in China were taking beauty as pain to an entirely new and toxic level with a little something called lead-based powders. Yep, you heard that right. Lead. The same stuff we now know better than to put anywhere near our faces was all the rage as a must-have beauty product. Talk about a killer look. In a society where being pale was the ultimate beauty goal, because who wants a tan when you can look like a ghost? These lead concoctions were the ancient equivalent of a DIY skincare fail. They promised a luminous complexion, but delivered, well, a host of health problems. Lead poisoning was a sneaky sidekick, slowly creeping up as these women unknowingly marinated in their makeup. But hey, at least they looked fabulous, right? It wasn't just about looking good, though. Behind the layers of powder and paint lay a stark economic reality. Hygiene wasn't just a matter of personal preference. It was a luxury affordably maintained by those with a hefty purse. Imagine a time when cleanliness was more than next to godliness. It was a status symbol. For the wealthiest, access to imported beauty ingredients and fine silks for bathing was just another Tuesday. Meanwhile, the less fortunate were left to scrub-a-dub-dub in whatever the local market had to offer, often a far cry from the exotic oils and perfumes of their richer peers. The economics of cleanliness also tied into where you stood on the social ladder. The Ming Dynasty, reigning supreme during this era, was a time when class distinctions were as clear as a diamond in the rough. If you were a lady of the court, you probably had an army of servants ensuring you were as pristine as a porcelain vase. But if you were a commoner, well, you might get to rinse off in the river if the weather was nice. And let's not forget that while the wealthy draped themselves in the finest silks and linens, they were also the ones who could afford to change these garments regularly. The poor, on the other hand, were left to make do with garments that might see more seasons than the average Netflix series. That said, the allure of cleanliness was universal, even if its execution was not. The aspiration to be clean and presentable crossed all social boundaries, with every woman navigating these murky waters in her own way. The pressures to conform to societal standards of beauty and purity were as real as the dangers lurking in their lead-laden beauty arsenals. What makes this all the more fascinating is how these practices were not just about vanity, but survival. In a time without antibiotics, a woman's appearance could directly affect her prospects, be it in marriage or social standing. Being clean and well-groomed could mean the difference between a comfortable life and one spent struggling at the margins. So, the next time you casually toss a face mask into your shopping cart, spare a thought for those ancient Chinese women who, in their quest for beauty, danced with danger every day. It's a sobering reminder of how far we've come and how much we take for granted. And remember, while the romance of history might tell us tales of exquisite beauty rituals, the reality was often a bit more leaden. Now, if you thought that ancient Chinese women had enough on their plates with lead-laden face powders, wait till we dive into their dental care practices. Forget everything you know about minty-fresh toothpaste and electric toothbrushes. We're about to take a sharp left turn into the world of tooth blackening, a trend that might make you want to hug your dentist. You see, in ancient China, there was a belief that teeth as dark as night were the epitome of elegance. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a cultural statement. Much like how a clean, bright smile is prized today, back then, a set of Inkai chompers was a mark of sophistication and maturity. The practice was so widespread that it even crossed borders, making its way to other East Asian cultures, like Japan and Vietnam, each putting their own spin on the art of dental darkness. So, how exactly did one achieve this look? Well, if you were hoping for a simple answer, buckle up. Tooth blackening involved a concoction of plant roots, charred nuts, and a dash of iron filings, because who doesn't love a little metal in their mouth? The mixture was then painted onto the teeth, turning them a deep shade of black. Think of it as the ancient version of a cosmetic makeover, but with fewer Instagram likes and more iron-induced flavors. But why, you ask, would anyone choose to go goth with their grin? The rationale was rooted in more than just looks. Blackened teeth were believed to protect against decay, an ancient method of cavity prevention. In a time when dental hygiene was rudimentary at best, this practice was as close as they got to fighting off the dreaded toothache. Plus, it was thought to ward off evil spirits, because why not kill two birds with one stone? Yet, while the romance of history paints a picture of mysterious elegance, the reality was a little less enchanting. Imagine walking around with a mouthful of metallic tasting goop, all for the sake of social norms. Those iron filings might have kept cavities at bay, but they surely didn't win any flavor awards. And let's not forget the economic factors at play. Only those with money to spare could afford the luxury of frequent blackening, leaving the less affluent with their natural, albeit less fashionable, pearly whites. Speaking of oral hygiene, let's not skip over the ancient strategies for combating halitosis. In a world devoid of peppermint gum or mouthwash, people had to get creative. Ancient Chinese remedies for bad breath included everything from chewing on aromatic tree bark to guzzling herbal teas. And for those daring enough, there was always the option of rinsing with vinegar and salt, a cocktail that probably left your mouth puckered and your breath, well, questionable at best. These methods may sound bizarre, but they highlight an important point. Even in ancient times, societal pressures dictated personal care routines. Just as we today might shell out for the latest whitening strips to emulate Hollywood smiles, our ancestors did what they could to fit the mold, sometimes enduring discomfort and odd tastes in the process. It's a testament to the timeless nature of beauty standards, always shifting, always demanding, yet oddly consistent in their capacity to make us do strange things. As we peel back the layers of these ancient practices, it's clear that the line between beauty and practicality was often blurred. While today's obsession with straight, white teeth is fueled by media portrayals, back then, the quest for darkened teeth was driven by a complex blend of cultural beliefs, economic status, and the ever-present desire to conform. It's a lesson from history that while the tools and techniques may change, the underlying motivations remain eerily familiar. And so, as we transition from the world of dental darkness, remember that these practices were not just about vanity, but survival in a society where appearances mattered. The next time you flash your bright smile in the mirror, perhaps spare a thought for those who came before, painting their teeth black in the name of beauty and protection. It's a reminder that history is full of fascinating, sometimes cringe-worthy practices that make our modern routines feel downright luxurious. Stay tuned, because the journey through ancient hygiene is just warming up. As we untangle ourselves from the fascinating world of dental theatrics, let's dive headfirst into another hairy subject, ancient Chinese hair care. Spoiler alert, today's obsession with glossy locks is nothing compared to the lengths our ancestors went to for luscious tresses. In a time when the rice bowl was not only a culinary staple, but also a beauty secret. Rice water was the go-to shampoo for women striving to make their hair the envy of the village. Picture this, a time when your local marketplace wasn't just a place to barter for spices, but also a hub for beauty enthusiasts. Women would religiously soak rice, collecting the milky water to wash their hair. Why rice water? Well, this simple concoction was believed to strengthen hair, making it long, silky, and most importantly, socially acceptable. Forget panty. This was the real ancient secret to hair that could practically double as a silk scarf. And it wasn't just a myth. Modern studies suggest rice water is rich in amino acids, vitamins, and minerals that can actually improve hair elasticity and reduce surface friction. Who knew that something so basic could be so beneficial? Now, if you think today's beauty industry is a barrage of clever marketing and too good to be true promises, just wait till you hear about the ancient merchants who capitalized on hair care trends. These early entrepreneurs were the ultimate beauty influencers, peddling everything from snake oil, literally, to concoctions made from exotic animal fats, claiming to offer the secret to Rapunzel-like larks. And much like today, where a Kardashian endorsement can make or break a product, the backing of a well-coiffed noblewoman was all it took to make these potions fly off the shelves faster than you could say false advertising. These hair merchants were nothing short of marketing geniuses, spinning tales as elaborate as the hairstyles they promised to create. Take, for instance, the Phoenix hair oil, a blend touted to give one's hair the resilience and shine of the mythical bird. In reality, it was likely a mix of whatever oils were on hand, sometimes with a splash of perfume to mask the scent of the more questionable ingredients. Yet, the allure of such products was undeniable. After all, who wouldn't want to channel a bit of mythical majesty in their daily look? But let's not get too tangled in the web of ancient advertising without addressing the long and short of hair's role in society. In ancient China, hair was more than just a personal style choice. It was a symbol of a woman's virtue and status. Long, well-maintained hair was the ultimate sign of femininity and fertility, a sort of social currency that could influence a woman's marriage prospects as much as her dowry. The longer one's hair, the more desirable they were considered. Talk about a hairy situation. But of course, hair length wasn't just about romance and ribbons. It played a role in political and social arenas as well. During the Han Dynasty, for instance, it was common for women to have hair long enough to touch the ground, a feat that was not just physically impressive, but also a statement of wealth and leisure. After all, maintaining such a mane required time and resources that only the upper echelons of society could afford. A peasant woman with ground-sweeping hair was as rare as a unicorn at a dog show. Meanwhile, hairstyles themselves could be political. Different dynasties favored different styles, and these trends trickled down through the classes. A change in the ruling dynasty often meant a shift in what was deemed fashionable. For example, the Tang dynasty saw women embracing more elaborate updos, while the Song dynasty favored simpler, more demure styles. These shifts weren't just about aesthetics. They reflected broader cultural and political changes, as hairstyles often symbolized allegiance or resistance to those in power. And let's not gloss over the fact that hair could also be a tool for rebellion. Cutting one's hair short was considered a grave insult to one's family and ancestors, akin to flipping the bird in a very, very public way. This was because hair was seen as a gift from one's parents, and altering it was tantamount to disrespecting the family lineage. So when rebels or dissidents wanted to make a statement, a haircut could be as powerful as a manifesto. In sum, the world of ancient Chinese haircare was a tangled tapestry of beauty, politics, and social maneuvering. While today we might fret over frizz or split ends, women of the past had to navigate a more complex landscape where every snip and style was laden with meaning. So next time you're in the shower, rinsing out that conditioner, remember the lengths, literally and figuratively, that our foremothers went to for their hair. As we continue our journey through history's grooming gauntlet, stay tuned for even more fascinating and sometimes cringe-worthy tales of beauty and hygiene. And speaking of tangled tapestries, let's weave our way into the world of ancient Chinese feminine hygiene, a subject that might just make modern conveniences feel like the ultimate luxury. Picture this. A time when monthly cycles were shrouded in secrecy and shame. A hush-hush affair that would make a covert CIA operation look like a neighborhood gossip session. Yes, folks, menstruation was the Voldemort of ancient China, something that must not be named. So, how exactly did women manage this natural phenomenon in a society that treated it like some sort of mystical curse? Enter the reusable cloth pads, the unsung heroes of ancient hygiene. These weren't your plush, ultra-thin, super-absorbent options you find in the aisles of your local supermarket today. Nope, we're talking about strips of fabric, often made from cotton or hemp, that women would wash and reuse. Practical, absolutely. Comfortable. Well, let's just say they were the best available option in a world devoid of tampons and sanitary pads. The use of these cloth pads was more than just a personal choice. It was an economic necessity. In a society where resources were as tightly controlled as the emperor's treasury, reusable was the name of the game. Disposable options. They were as mythical as a unicorn, and if such a thing existed, it would likely be reserved for the elite, who had enough money to literally throw away. Meanwhile, the average woman was left to make do with her trusty cloth, a cycle of rinse, repeat, and hopefully dry before the next use. However, the hygiene practices didn't stop at cloth pads. Women of ancient China also turned to herbal remedies to manage menstruation, which were often passed down through generations like treasured family recipes. These concoctions, brewed from ingredients like ginger, mugwort, and even dried fruit, were believed to alleviate pain and regulate cycles. While the science behind these herbal potions might have been shaky, the placebo effect, coupled with centuries of tradition, meant they were an essential part of a woman's monthly routine. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. While these solutions were practical, they also came with a hefty dose of societal baggage. Menstruation was considered unclean, and women were often subjected to restrictions during their periods. Imagine being relegated to a separate area of your home, a sort of menstrual quarantine, where you were barred from participating in everyday activities. Sounds fun, right? It's a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained cultural taboos can shape personal experiences. And while we're on the subject of taboos, let's dive into the bizarre myths that swirled around menstruation like a bad smell. Some believed that menstrual blood could ward off evil spirits, or that a woman's mere presence during her period could spoil food or wine. In a society that loved its symbolism and superstition, these myths were more persistent than a bad cold, shaping attitudes and behaviors in ways that echo through history. Yet, despite these challenges, the economic and social impact of menstrual practices was significant. In a world where women's roles were often confined to the domestic sphere, managing menstruation was an act of quiet rebellion, a way to maintain dignity and agency in a society that offered little of either. The ability to work, care for one's family, and participate in communal life, even during one's period, was a testament to resilience and resourcefulness. It was a subtle yet powerful assertion of presence in a world that often tried to render women invisible. And let's not overlook the economic angle. Access to materials for cloth pads or herbs for remedies was a luxury not everyone could afford. This divide mirrored broader societal inequalities, where wealth dictated not just comfort but basic dignity. The rich could afford finer fabrics and a variety of herbs, while the poor made do with whatever scraps they could find, highlighting a stark disparity that was as visible as the Great Wall. So, as we unravel the layers of ancient Chinese feminine hygiene, remember that these practices were more than mere routines. They were a reflection of broader societal dynamics. They reveal the lengths to which women went to navigate a world that often seemed designed to ignore or even punish them for their natural biology. It's a story of resilience and ingenuity, one that underscores the timeless truth that necessity really is the mother of invention. As we continue this journey through the annals of history, keep in mind that the story of women in ancient China, like their menstrual practices, is complex, nuanced, and often hidden in plain sight. The next time you reach for a box of tampons or pads, take a moment to appreciate the modern conveniences that make our lives a little easier, and remember the women who paved the way with nothing but cloth, herbs, and an indomitable spirit. Stay tuned, because the adventure through ancient hygiene isn't over yet. We're just getting started, and the next chapter promises to be just as enlightening, and perhaps a little less cringy, than the last. As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of ancient Chinese hygiene, let's take a moment to unravel how these practices have spun their way into modern myths and beauty trends, leaving us with a tapestry of do's, don'ts, and what were they thinking moments. First off, let's get one thing straight. While we may chuckle at the idea of lead face powder or blackened teeth, these practices had a peculiar charm, a misguided allure, if you will, that's echoed in some of today's beauty routines. You see, back then, beauty was more than skin deep. It was a currency of social standing and survival, a truth as old as time itself. The desire to conform to societal standards, be it through whitening creams or teeth blackening, was driven by the same primal urge that makes us reach for those Instagram filters today. The methods may have changed, but the motivations, not so much. We still live in a world where appearance can open or slam shut doors, much like those ladies of the Ming Dynasty who wielded their powdered faces as tickets to social acceptance. Fast forward a few hundred years, and while we've ditched the lead, thankfully, The obsession with pale skin persists in many cultures. The global skincare industry, valued at a staggering $183 billion in 2023, cashes in on this age-old fixation with products promising brighter, lighter complexions. The irony: many of these modern potions are inspired by ancient recipes, minus the mercury and arsenic, of course. It's a testament to how history's beauty blunders can transform into today's trends, with a bit of rebranding and a lot less toxicity. Now, let's talk about the enduring appeal of ancient remedies. Take rice water for hair, for example. This humble concoction has made a roaring comeback in the beauty world, championed by influencers and backed by science. It turns out those ancient Chinese women were onto something when they rinsed their hair with this milky elixir. Studies show it can improve hair elasticity and shine, making it a darling of the DIY beauty scene. Who would have thought that a staple from the kitchen could be the secret to luscious locks? And what about the herbal menstrual remedies? While the notion of quaffing a ginger mugwort cocktail might raise eyebrows today, the underlying principle, using natural ingredients for relief, hasn't lost its appeal. Herbal teas and supplements abound in health stores, promising everything from pain relief to mood enhancement. It seems the ancient wisdom of using nature's bounty for wellness has stood the test of time, with modern science playing catch-up to verify what our ancestors instinctively knew. But let's not romanticize the past without acknowledging the progress we've made. Modern hygiene practices, from tampons to electric toothbrushes, have revolutionized our daily routines, offering convenience and effectiveness our ancestors could only dream of. Yet, the journey from ancient to modern hasn't been a straight line. It's more of a winding road, with detours through superstition and pseudoscience. We've learned a lot along the way, like maybe, just maybe, applying toxic substances to our skin isn't the best idea. The history of hygiene is a mirror reflecting our eternal quest for beauty, health, and social acceptance. It's a reminder that while we might cringe at the thought of ancient beauty blunders, our modern rituals will likely be the subject of future chuckles. After all, each era thinks it's cracked the code to perfection, only to be proven otherwise by the relentless march of time. So, what lessons can we glean from this journey through history's grooming gauntlet? First, the importance of questioning societal norms, especially when they come with a side of metallic tasting goop or toxic powder. Second, the value of cultural heritage, which can offer surprising insights into effective remedies and practices. And finally, the realization that while the tools and techniques may change, the human desire for self-improvement and acceptance remains a constant force, driving innovation and occasionally hilarity. As we conclude this exploration, let's raise a metaphorical glass to those ancient Chinese women who navigated their world with resilience and ingenuity. Their legacy lives on in the products we use, the rituals we uphold, and the standards we strive to meet. So the next time you indulge in a beauty routine, spare a thought for the lessons of the past, the progress of the present, and the possibilities of the future. In the end, history is more than just a collection of dates and names. It's a reflection of our shared humanity, with all its quirks and contradictions. And as we look back, let's remember to laugh, to learn, and to appreciate the journey from lead-laden powders to lab-tested skincare. After all, in the grand tapestry of time, we're just one thread in an ever-evolving narrative of beauty and hygiene. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep washing your hands. Osman, I probably didn't wake up one morning in the late 13th century and think, you know what, I'd like to start an empire today. But somehow, that's exactly what happened. In the dusty and chaotic landscape of Anatolia, Osman managed to carve out a little slice of heaven, or at least a slice of land. Let's be honest, this wasn't exactly the prime real estate of the medieval world. Yet, Osman had something many others lacked: a knack for opportunism and a dream that, depending on who you ask, might have been more about survival than grandeur. The year was around 1299, though historians bicker over precise dates, like two cats over a single can of tuna. What we do know is that Osman belonged to a group of Turkic tribesmen known as the K, who had wandered into the Anatolian region as the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum was on its way out. Talk about timing. The Seljuks were caught in a death spiral, and Osman saw the chance to step into the power vacuum they were leaving behind. It's a classic tale of one man's collapse being another man's climb to the top. Osman's empire, which began as a mere principality, was located in the northwest of modern-day Turkey. Back then was a patchwork quilt of territories and tiny states, each one more interested in survival than unification. But Osman had ambition. He started expanding his domain through strategic marriages and military campaigns. If Netflix were around back then, this would be binge-worthy drama. It was a shrewd mix of diplomacy and swords, mostly swords, considering he wasn't exactly marrying into European royalty. The story of Osman's supposed dream is particularly juicy, though it comes with a side of skepticism. Legend has it that Osman dreamt of a tree growing from his belly, its branches spreading out to cover the world. This was interpreted as a divine sign that he was destined to start an empire. Sounds epic, right? But let's pause for a moment. It's likely this tale was cooked up by later Ottoman historians trying to sprinkle some destiny dust on their origin story. After all, what's more inspiring than a good old prophecy? In reality, the only thing Osman probably saw in his dreams was the occasional kebab. Under Osman's leadership, the initial expansion was modest, more of a slow and steady nibbling rather than a ravenous gulp. By the time of his death in 1326, the Ottomans had captured the city of Bursa, which became their first capital. Bursa wasn't just a trophy, it was a strategic hub, a center of trade and wealth that would fuel further conquests. Here's a fun fact. The Ottomans were masters at turning former Byzantine cities into their own, like flipping a fixer-upper into a millionaire's mansion. They didn't just conquer, they transformed. Osman's son, Orhan, picked up where Dad left off, proving that the apple, if we're sticking with the tree metaphor, didn't fall far from the proverbial oak. Under Orhan's rule, from 1326 to 1362, the Ottomans went from a promising startup to a formidable force. Orhan introduced some innovations that would set the Ottomans apart. For starters, he established a standing army. Unlike many of their rivals, who relied on feudal levies, the Ottomans created the Janissaries, an elite infantry unit made up initially of Christian boys taken through the Devshirme system. Yes, it was as intense as it sounds. And no, it wasn't exactly a career choice. The Janissaries were a game changer. They were well trained, loyal to the Sultan, and had a penchant for being rather effective on the battlefield. This was a time when loyalty was as fluid as a spilled drink, so having troops that wouldn't stab you in the back was priceless. Orhan also made wise political alliances, marrying Theodora, the daughter of a Byzantine emperor. By today's standards, it was the ultimate power couple move, like marrying into the board of your rival company. By the mid-14th century, the Ottomans were knocking on Europe's door, not with a polite tap, but a resounding bang. Enter Murad I, Osman's grandson, who took over the expansionist reins from 1362 to 1389. Murad didn't just expand. He exploded onto the scene, capturing Adrianople, modern-day Edirne, in 1369, and making it the new capital. This wasn't just a geographic shift, it was a statement of intent. The Ottomans were not just looking eastward, they had their sights firmly set on the west. Murad's reign was marked by both military genius and the occasional bout of brutality. In 1389, he won the Battle of Kosovo, a victory that solidified Ottoman power in the Balkans but came at the cost of his life. According to some accounts, Murad was assassinated on the battlefield by a Serbian knight. Talk about going out with a bang. His death didn't slow the Ottomans down, though. The empire was already a well-oiled machine, with a leadership system that was surprisingly robust for the time. So, was the rise of the Ottoman Empire a preordained destiny or just a fortunate series of events? It's probably a bit of both. The Ottomans were masters of adaptation, able to turn every challenge into an opportunity. They took advantage of the fragmented political landscape, the decline of the Byzantines, and the power struggles in Europe. They weren't just lucky, they were savvy. In the end, the Ottomans' early years weren't about dreaming big dreams, but about seizing every opportunity with both hands. Maybe Osman didn't dream of a world-spanning empire, but he laid the foundations for one. The tree from his legendary dream might have been a myth, but the roots were very, very real. As the roots of Osman's empire dug deeper into the terrain of both Europe and Asia, the Ottomans were setting the stage for what would be their golden age. Fast forward to the 16th century, a time when the name Suleiman the Magnificent echoed across continents like a rock star, with a really powerful entourage. Suleiman didn't just inherit an empire, he inherited a beast, and boy, did he know how to ride it. The time Suleiman took the throne in 1520, the Ottoman Empire was already a heavyweight contender in the geopolitical ring. But under Suleiman's rule, the empire flexed its muscles even further, stretching from the gates of Vienna in the west to the Persian Gulf in the east. Imagine an empire so vast it had to juggle different time zones before it was cool. At the height of its power, the empire spanned an astonishing 2 million square kilometers. That's about half of modern-day Europe, if you're counting. So, what made Suleiman so magnificent? Was it his military prowess, his legal reforms, or maybe just an excellent PR team with a penchant for hyperbole? The truth, as always, is a cocktail of all three, shaken not stirred. Suleiman was a military juggernaut, leading 13 campaigns during his reign and expanding the empire's territory by roughly 46,000 square kilometers. His siege of Vienna in 1529, though unsuccessful, sent shivers down European spines, a reminder that the Ottomans were not a power to be trifled with. But it wasn't all about conquest and glory. Suleiman was also a legal eagle, sometimes called the lawgiver, for his substantial reforms in Ottoman law. He streamlined the justice system, doing away with outdated punishments and centralizing authority. Think of it as the Ottoman version of Marie Kondoing the state, sparking joy through efficient governance. He codified laws across the empire, ensuring that justice was as uniform as the Janissaries' uniforms, which, by the way, were quite snazzy for their time. Speaking of Janissaries, let's not forget these elite troops, the empire's not-so-secret weapon. Originally composed of Christian boys recruited through the Devshirme system, they were converted to Islam and trained as soldiers loyal only to the Sultan. It's a tale as old as time. Take the best of the conquered, mold them into a fighting force, and unleash them when needed. This system wasn't just a military strategy, it was an empire-building blueprint. Culturally, Suleiman's reign was a renaissance of its own kind. The empire became a melting pot of art, architecture, and science, rivaling the Italian Renaissance. The Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, with its opulent decor and sprawling courtyards, was a testament to the empire's wealth and artistic grandeur. Under Suleiman's patronage, the Ottoman Empire became a cradle for poets, architects, and scholars. Mimar Sinan, the empire's chief architect, designed masterpieces like the Suleimani Mosque, a structure that still stands today as a symbol of Ottoman architectural brilliance. It's a bit like having a Frank Lloyd right in your pocket, only with more minarets. Economically, the empire was a juggernaut. The Ottomans were masters of trade, capitalizing on their strategic locations straddling Europe and Asia. They controlled key trade routes, becoming the middlemen who practically owned the Silk Road. The empire's economy was as diverse as its territory, dealing in everything from spices and silk to the more mundane but equally lucrative goods like grain and textiles. The state collected taxes with an efficiency that would make any modern IRS agent weep with envy, ensuring a steady flow of revenue that fed Suleiman's ambitious projects and military campaigns. But let's pause for a moment. Was Suleiman truly as magnificent as the history books would have us believe, or is this just a case of historical marketing with a splash of myth-making? It's easy to get swept away by tales of grandeur, but beneath the surface, the empire was a complex web of political machinations and social tensions. For every victory on the battlefield, there were plots and intrigues within the palace walls. The infamous harem, a place often romanticized in tales of exotic opulence, was also a hotbed of political maneuvering, where alliances were as fragile as a sultan's patience. Suleiman's reign also had its share of controversies. His love affair with Hurrem Sultan, better known as Roxolana, was legendary. A former slave who became his wife and wielded considerable influence, Hurrem broke all the conventions of Ottoman court life. Her rise to power was both a love story and a political drama, stirring up more than a few whispers of scandal. Her influence was so profound that some historians argue she played a role in shaping state policies, a far cry from the traditional image of women in the Ottoman court. Despite the empire's outward strength, cracks were beginning to show. The administrative system, though robust, was heavily reliant on the Sultan's personal charisma and leadership. As Suleiman aged, the challenges of governing such a vast empire became increasingly apparent. The very elements that made the empire great, its diversity, its expanse, were also its greatest vulnerabilities. Maintaining control over such a vast and varied population required constant vigilance, a task that would become even more daunting for his successors. In the end, Suleiman's legacy is a tapestry of triumphs and tribulations. His reign marked the pinnacle of Ottoman power, but it also sowed the seeds for future challenges. Was he magnificent? In many ways, yes. But like any great story, his was one of complexity and contradiction, a reminder that even the grandest narratives are woven from threads of both myth and reality. Empire he left behind was a colossus, standing tall but casting a long shadow, a shadow that future sultans would struggle to step out of. And so, as the sun set on Suleiman's reign, the Ottomans stood at the crossroads of their destiny, poised between the heights of their golden age and the challenges of an uncertain future. As they say, heavy is the head that wears the turban, especially when it's weighed down by such a magnificent legacy. Yet, as the shadows lengthened over Suleiman's reign, the Ottomans navigated the complexities of their colossal empire with a blend of strategic brilliance and Byzantine intrigue. Let's kick off with the harem, a place often mistaken for a medieval version of a soap opera set. Though exoticized in Western imagination as a leisure-filled paradise of lounging women, the Ottoman harem was, in reality, a political nerve center. This was no mere assemblage of idle concubines. It was a buzzing hive of influence where alliances were forged, and power brokering was as common as afternoon tea. The harem was home to the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, who, more often than not, was the real power behind the throne. Picture her as the ultimate stage mom, only instead of piano recitals, she orchestrated political strategies. As a gatekeeper of the Sultan's private life, she wielded enormous influence over state affairs. The harem was also the training ground for future sultans, a place where they learned the art of governance, or at least how to dodge the occasional palace intrigue. It was less about romance and more about realpolitik. Think Machiavelli in silk robes. Moving from the palace's inner workings to the empire's broader stage, let's delve into the economic system. The Ottomans weren't just about battles and borders. They had an economy to run, and that's where the timur system comes into play. Imagine a feudal system, but with a twist. The timur was a land grant given by the Sultan to his loyal military servants, the Sipahis. In return, these landholders collected taxes and provided soldiers for the Sultan's armies. It was a win-win, or at least it was supposed to be until, like all good things, it started to unravel. You see, the timur system required a delicate balance, much like balancing a dinner plate on a wobbly table. As the empire expanded and the demands of warfare increased, the system began to crack under the pressure. Sipahis, once loyal and efficient, started slacking off or, worse, skimming more than just a little off the top. By the 16th century, corruption was as rampant as a flu outbreak in a kindergarten classroom. And as the system declined, so did the military effectiveness of the once dominant Ottoman cavalry. Economics, my friends, is where the real drama hides. While battles make for thrilling stories, it's often economic policies that decide the fate of empires. The Ottomans learned this the hard way as their financial troubles multiplied. Inflation became a nasty guest that just wouldn't leave, driven in part by the influx of New World silver into Europe, which devalued the Ottoman currency. All of a sudden, the mighty empire was feeling the pinch, and not the good kind like when you find a forgotten tenner in your winter coat. This financial turmoil was compounded by the empire's administrative structure, which, for all its grandeur, relied heavily on an elaborate bureaucracy. The Ottomans had a penchant for paperwork that would make any modern-day office drone's head spin. This bureaucratic machine was an impressive feat of organization, with layers of officials overseeing everything from local governance to imperial edicts. However, the system was only as strong as its weakest link, and boy, were there weak links. Corruption, nepotism, and inefficiency were as common in the Ottoman bureaucracy as coffee breaks are in today's offices. At the heart of this complex web was the Grand Vizier, the Sultan's right-hand man. Think of him as the empire's COO, only with more opulent headgear. The Grand Vizier wielded significant power, often acting as the de facto ruler while the Sultan busied himself with other matters, like grandiose architectural projects, or, the occasional war. This position was both coveted and perilous. One day you're on top of the world, the next you might find yourself out of a job, or ahead, if you displeased the Sultan. Now, let's bust some myths. The Ottomans aren't just the villains in your high school history books. Their administration was a marvel of its time. They created a legal system that was both sophisticated and surprisingly fair, given the era. The canon laws, established during Suleiman's reign, provided a cohesive legal framework that helped maintain order across the vast empire. It wasn't a utopia, but considering the period, it was as close as you could get to a functioning system of justice. Yet for all the legal prowess, the empire was plagued by the same issues that haunt large bureaucracies today: inconsistency, favoritism, and an over-reliance on outdated practices. The Ottomans' inability to adapt their economic policies to the changing world was like trying to run a blockbuster store in a Netflix world. The timur system's decline was a harbinger of things to come, a warning that the empire needed to modernize or face the consequences. As we wrap up this segment of our historical journey, remember that the Ottoman Empire was a complex beast. It was more than just a series of conquests and courtly dramas. It was an intricate tapestry woven with threads of politics, economics, and culture. The empire's rise and fall were shaped not just by the battles won and lost, but by the choices made in the halls of power and the fields of finance. So next time you think of the Ottomans, remember that behind the grand facade were real people grappling with very modern problems. The story isn't done yet, but for now, let's leave the Sultan to ponder his empire's future, both glorious and precarious. Just as the sun set on Suleiman's reign, casting long shadows over a vast empire, the Ottomans found themselves grappling with the slow, methodical unraveling of their dominion. Picture the empire like an enormous, decadent cake that's been left out too long, a bit stale, with pieces missing, but still imposing enough to impress the neighbors. By the late 17th century, the Ottomans were no longer the fresh-faced conquerors they once were, but more like a heavyweight champ who's taken a few too many punches. Let's kick things off with a slice of humble pie known as the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. Talk about a wake-up call. This was the point where the Ottomans realized they weren't the undisputed rulers of the Roost anymore. After a decade of tussles known as the Great Turkish War, they found themselves signing away significant chunks of territory in Europe, including Hungary and Transylvania, to the Habsburg monarchy. Imagine opening your mail one day and finding out you've lost your summer home and the family car. Ouch. This wasn't just a territorial loss. It was a psychological blow that sent ripples through the empire's collective ego. The Ottomans had long seen themselves as the gatekeepers of Islam and the bulwark against European encroachment. Now they were the ones retreating, and they had to grapple with a new reality. Europe wasn't just a neighbor anymore. It was an ambitious, nosy neighbor with a penchant for acquiring property. Speaking of neighbors, the Ottomans found themselves in an increasingly awkward dance with the European powers, each looking to slice off their piece of the Ottoman pie. Russia, under Peter the Great, was particularly keen on expanding southward to gain access to warm water ports. Imagine if your annoying neighbor suddenly decided he needed a piece of your backyard to build a pool. Not cool, Peter. Not cool at all. Internally, things were no better. The once mighty Ottoman military machine was starting to look more like a rusty old jalopy than a sleek war chariot. The Janissaries, those elite troops who'd once struck fear into the hearts of Europe, had become a shadow of their former selves. Over time, they transformed from a disciplined fighting force into a bloated, unruly mob more interested in politics than protecting the empire. In fact, they became so involved in court intrigue that they were more likely to overthrow a sultan than defend his throne. Imagine your bodyguards suddenly deciding they'd like to take your job. Talk about an occupational hazard. The Ottoman economy, too, was hemorrhaging faster than a ship with a dozen holes. The influx of silver from the New World had thrown their monetary system into chaos, leading to inflation that made today's economic woes look like a minor inconvenience. With the timur system on the decline and tax revenues dwindling, the empire was like a family trying to keep up appearances on a rapidly shrinking budget. They needed cash and fast, but their traditional sources of income were drying up quicker than a puddle in the Sahara. Adding to the chaos was the administrative mishmash that had developed over centuries. The Ottomans had an affinity for bureaucracy that rivaled modern-day government agencies, and like any good bureaucracy, it was riddled with inefficiency and corruption. Officials were more interested in lining their own pockets than filling the empire's coffers, leading to a system that was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. As if this wasn't enough, the Ottomans faced a growing tide of nationalism within their borders. Various ethnic and religious groups, tired of being sidelined, began to agitate for more autonomy. The empire was like a patchwork quilt where each piece was pulling in a different direction, threatening to rip apart at the seams. The Ottomans had to navigate this delicate political terrain while trying to keep their grand tapestry from unraveling completely. Now, let's debunk a myth. The decline of the Ottoman Empire wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was more like a slow, painful deflation. Picture a balloon with a slow leak rather than a sudden pop. The Ottomans still had some life left in them, and they weren't going down without a fight. They attempted to reform, to modernize their military and administration, but these efforts were often too little, too late. One noble attempt at reform was the Tanzimat period in the mid-19th century, which aimed to centralize and streamline the empire's governance. The Ottomans borrowed ideas from Europe, trying to inject some new life into their old systems. Imagine an aging rock star trying to stay relevant by adopting the latest trends. The Ottomans were no different. They wanted to keep up, but they had a lot of catching up to do. Despite these efforts, the empire continued to lose ground, literally and metaphorically. The Crimean War, 1853-1856, saw them allied with Britain and France against Russia, a partnership that highlighted their weakened state. Sure, they managed to fend off Russian expansion, but it came at the cost of increased dependency on European powers. It was a bit like borrowing money from a friend to pay off another debt. It solves one problem, but creates another. As the 19th century rolled on, the Ottomans found themselves increasingly at the mercy of European interests. The infamous "sick man of Europe" label stuck to them like a stubborn stain, a reminder that they were no longer the formidable empire they once were. European powers were circling like vultures, eager to pick apart the remains of a once great empire. The Ottomans were forced into a series of compromises and capitulations, giving up more and more territory in the process. Yet, even in the face of decline, the Ottomans held on to their rich cultural legacy. Istanbul remained a vibrant hub of art, music, and literature, a testimony to the empire's enduring influence. Ottoman architecture continued to awe and inspire, with structures like the Dolmabahce Palace standing as monuments to their former glory. It was as if the empire was saying, "We may be down, but we're not out." The slow decline of the Ottoman Empire is a tale of ambition, adaptation, and ultimately the inability to keep pace with an ever-changing world. It's a story that reminds us of the age-old adage, adapt or perish. The Ottomans tried to adapt, but the world was moving at a speed they simply couldn't match. As we leave this chapter, remember that the story of the Ottoman Empire is far from over. The stage is set for the final act, where the once mighty empire will face its greatest challenges yet. Stay tuned as we delve into the turbulent years that will see the Ottomans struggle to keep their place in a world that's rapidly leaving them behind. As the Ottoman Empire teetered on the precipice of the 20th century, it was like a once grand mansion, now creaking under the weight of years, with the wallpaper peeling and the roof leaking, but still standing tall against the odds. The world was changing faster than you could say, industrial revolution, and the Ottomans were scrambling to find their place in it. Enter the Young Turks, a group of reformist zealots who brought energy and ambition to a political system that needed a serious reboot. Their 1908 revolution was a bold attempt to overhaul the empire's archaic structures, like trying to retrofit a steam engine with Wi-Fi. The Young Turks were a mixed bag of idealists and pragmatists, united by a vision of constitutionalism and modernization. They were determined to drag the Ottoman Empire kicking and screaming into the modern era. Picture them like a group of tech-savvy millennials trying to teach their grandparents how to use smartphones. Their revolution reinstated the Ottoman constitution of 1876 and ushered in a period known as the Second Constitutional Era. It was a time of hope, a flicker of light in an otherwise dim room. But as with all good intentions, the path was fraught with obstacles. The empire was still a patchwork quilt of ethnicities and religions, each piece pulling in a different direction, creating tensions that the Young Turks couldn't quite mend. Economically, Young Turks faced a Herculean task. The Ottoman economy was in shambles, akin to a ship with a broken compass, adrift in choppy waters. They knew they needed to modernize, but the empire's coffers were as empty as a soda can on a hot summer day. The Ottomans were heavily in debt to European powers, who were more than happy to offer loans at exorbitant rates. It was financial colonization with a smile, a reminder that money talks, and it wasn't speaking Turkish. Politically, the Young Turks were walking a tightrope. They had to balance reform with maintaining the empire's territorial integrity. Nationalist movements were bubbling up like a pot of boiling water across the Balkans, threatening to spill over and scald everything in their path. The Balkan Wars of 1912-1913 were a painful reminder of this, as the Ottomans lost nearly all of their European territories. It was a gut punch to an already battered empire, leaving them with only a sliver of land in the continent they once dominated. As World War I loomed on the horizon, the Ottomans found themselves in a precarious position. They were the once great empire, now being seduced by the Central Powers' promises of glory and territorial gains. In 1914, they threw their lot in with Germany and Austria-Hungary, hoping to reclaim lost territories and prestige. It was a gamble of epic proportions, akin to betting the family farm on a long shot at the races. The empire became embroiled in a war that would ultimately seal its fate, with the Gallipoli campaign and the Battle of Sarikamish standing as stark examples of Ottoman losses that drained resources and morale. The war also exposed the empire's internal fractures, as ethnic tensions reached a boiling point. The Armenian genocide, a dark and horrific chapter, remains a painful and controversial subject to this day. The Young Turks, in their desperate bid to unify the empire, resorted to brutal measures that left indelible scars on history. It's a grim reminder that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions, or, in this case, misguided nationalism. By the time the guns fell silent in 1918, the Ottoman Empire was on life support, a shell of its former self. The Treaty of Sevres in 1920 was the final nail in the coffin, carving up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey. The treaty dismembered Ottoman lands, handing large swaths to the Allied powers and creating new nations out of the empire's remnants. It was an indignity that left the Ottomans reeling, a bitter end to a once glorious empire. But history, in its infinite capacity for irony, wasn't quite done with the Ottomans. In the ashes of the empire, a new figure emerged, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. A military hero with a vision as clear as the Bosphorus on a sunny day, Ataturk was determined to build a new Turkey from the ruins. In 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was officially abolished, and with it, the empire's centuries-long reign came to an end. Ataturk's reforms were sweeping, transforming Turkey into a secular republic with a modern outlook. He replaced the Arabic script with the Latin alphabet, revamped the legal system, and championed education and women's rights. It was a seismic shift, a rebirth that was both radical and necessary. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of grandeur and tragedy. It left behind a rich cultural heritage, a testament to its former glory. From the majestic minarets of Istanbul to the intricate Ottoman cuisine, the empire's influence is still felt today. Yet, its fall also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of stagnation and the necessity of adaptation. The Ottomans, for all their might, failed to evolve with a rapidly changing world, and in doing so, they paved the way for their own demise. In the end, the story of the Ottoman Empire is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing narrative shaped by human ambition, folly, and resilience. It's a story that echoes through time, teaching us that empires rise and fall, but the legacy they leave behind can endure, like a melody that lingers long after the music has stopped. So, as we close this chapter, let's raise a glass to the Ottomans, a toast to their triumphs and failures alike. Because sometimes, history doesn't just repeat itself, it also sends a fruit basket, reminding us of the enduring impact of the past on the world we know today. The air is chilly, and you're jolted awake by the no-nonsense clanging of the monastery bell. Forget the snooze button. This is your medieval wake-up call, and it's not taking 5 more minutes for an answer. It's somewhere around 4:30 a.m., but who's counting? Certainly not you, because you're living in a time when sundials are the height of technology. This is the start of your day as a medieval monk, a life ruled by the all-seeing, all-knowing rule of St. Benedict. If monks had a GPS, it would be set permanently to divine devotion. Now, before diving into the day, let's clear up a common myth: the idea of the monastery as a tranquil haven of solitude and silent meditation. Sure, there's plenty of quiet time, but it's not all about Zen-like contemplation. In reality, monasteries were the bustling centers of medieval life, a mix of spiritual retreat and economic powerhouse. Monks were not just soul searchers. They were also farmers, scribes, and sometimes even brewers. If you think your morning commute is tough, try managing hundreds of acres of farmland before breakfast. So, what's guiding this rigorous schedule? Enter the Rule of St. Benedict, the medieval equivalent of a corporate handbook for monastic life. Written around 516 AD, it's a 73-chapter guide on how to live the monk life, and it's not exactly light reading. The rule outlines everything from when to pray to how much sleep you should get. Spoiler, it's not a lot. The centerpiece of this routine is the Divine Office, a series of 8 prayer services spaced throughout the day and night. It's like having 8-minute church services as your daily playlist. You're about to experience the first of these, known as matins, or vigils. But before you can even think about spiritual enlightenment, you've got to handle the earthly chores. The monastery's not just a spiritual HQ, it's also a major economic player. Picture vast stretches of land dedicated to crops and livestock, managed by, you guessed it, you. Monasteries often owned hundreds, even thousands of acres. Think of them as the agribusinesses of their day, responsible for feeding not just the monks, but sometimes entire communities. The monks were the original locavores, producing everything from grain to honey, with some even brewing their own beer. Yes, monastic life included happy hour, albeit a very pious one. Now, you might be wondering, how does all this agricultural prowess fit into a spiritual mission? Well, the economic engine of the monastery was crucial for its survival and its mission to help others. By being self-sufficient, monasteries could provide for the poor, the sick, and the traveling pilgrims who showed up at their doors expecting hospitality. This wasn't just charity, it was a core part of their religious duty. The monk's motto could well have been pray hard, work harder. Back to your day, you shuffle into the dimly lit chapel for matins, the first service of the day. It's a long affair, sometimes lasting up to 3 hours, filled with psalms, hymns, and readings. The monotone chant of your fellow monks echoes through the stone walls, a rhythmic sound that's both mesmerizing and, let's face it, a little sleep-inducing. But don't even think about nodding off. St. Benedict's rule is watching. Monks were expected to be fully present, mind and spirit, so you'd better believe there was some intense focus going on. Once matins wraps up, it's time for a quick break before the next service, Lord's, at dawn. It's a brief moment to catch your breath, maybe even sneak a sip of water or contemplate your role in the grand scheme of things. Just don't get too comfortable. The day is just getting started, and there's plenty more work to do. This isn't a spiritual retreat with spa breaks. It's a full-time commitment to a life of dedicated service. By now, you might be wondering, with all this praying and farming, did monks ever get a break? Well, not really. The rule of St. Benedict was all about balance, but that balance leaned heavily toward work and prayer. Free time wasn't really a thing. The closest you get to downtime was mealtime, where the only conversation was the sound of a single monk reading aloud from a religious text. It was like a dinner theater, but without the drama or the dessert. So, as the sun rises and the day unfolds, remember that you're part of a system that's been in place for hundreds of years. The monastery is more than just a place of worship. It's a self-sustaining community, a center of learning, and an economic hub. It's a place where spirituality and practicality meet in a way that's both inspiring and, let's admit it, exhausting. But hey, at least you're not dealing with rush hour traffic. By the time the sun has decided to make its grand entrance, painting the stone walls with a hint of morning glow, you're headed back to the chapel for Lord's. Think of it as a spiritual pit stop before breakfast, a quick prayer service to get your head in the right place after the marathon that was matins. It's brief, but it's packed with psalms and hymns, the monks' voices rising like a well-rehearsed Gregorian boy band. But don't expect any tambourines or dance numbers. This isn't a medieval talent show. Once Lords wraps up, it's time for breakfast. Now, let's talk about what's on the medieval menu. If you were under the impression that monks spent their days in perpetual fasting, surviving on nothing but holy thoughts, it's time to adjust your mental picture. Breakfast typically consisted of bread and ale, the medieval version of a continental breakfast, minus the tiny jars of jam. Bread was the staff of life back then, quite literally. It was a staple in every monk's diet, probably because it was easy to make in large quantities and could fill you up without emptying the monastery's coffers. As for the ale, think of it as a multi-purpose beverage, hydration, and a mild buzz all in one. Given that water purification was more of a wishful idea than a reality, ale was the safer bet for your morning drink. Now, let's debunk the fasting myth. Yes, monks fasted, but not in the way you might think. Fasting wasn't about emaciating oneself to a saintly stature. It was more of a regulated reduction in food intake, usually observed on specific religious days. The rule of St. Benedict allowed for 2 meals a day, one around noon and another in the evening. The idea was to avoid gluttony, not to become a poster child for ascetic living. You see, medieval monks were practical folks. They knew that you needed fuel to plow fields and copy manuscripts. Starving monks would be about as useful as a plow made of pudding. Speaking of practicality, the monastic diet wasn't just about bread and ale. Monks were savvy enough to diversify their food sources. Enter the fish ponds and herb gardens, the unsung heroes of the monastic dining experience. Fish ponds were more than just scenic water features. They were vital for ensuring a steady supply of protein. Monasteries often managed extensive ponds teeming with carp, eels, and pike, which sounds like the makings of a medieval sushi bar, but with a lot more praying. Herb gardens were another crucial component, providing a smorgasbord of flavors and medicinal herbs. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a farm-to-table restaurant, minus the pretentious menus and exorbitant prices. Herbs like thyme, sage, and mint were grown not just for culinary purposes, but also for their healing properties, which was essential in an era where the closest thing to a pharmacy was a patch of chamomile. Maintaining these operations wasn't just a matter of planting and praying. It required a well-organized system, and here's where the economic implications come in. Monasteries were like miniature economies, each with its own infrastructure. Fish ponds had to be stocked and managed, herb gardens tended, and bread baked, all of which demanded labor, resources, and a bit of strategic planning. The cost of maintaining these operations wasn't trivial. Many monasteries owned vast tracts of land, which they either farmed themselves or leased out to local peasants. This created a ripple effect, boosting local economies and providing jobs. In a way, monasteries were the original job creators, long before tech startups made it cool. The economic impact didn't stop at local employment. By producing their own food, monasteries could ensure a degree of self-sufficiency, reducing reliance on external markets. This not only insulated them against food shortages, but also allowed them to be generous benefactors during tough times, providing food to the needy. It was a win-win situation. The monastery maintained its spiritual and economic integrity, and the community prospered. This symbiotic relationship was a cornerstone of monastic life, a testament to the monk's ability to blend spirituality with practicality. In essence, monks were the unsung heroes of medieval agriculture, the silent guardians of food security. They were more than just religious devotees. They were pioneers in sustainable living, centuries before it became a hashtag. And while the romantic image of the fasting monk persists, the reality is far richer and more complex. Their diet was not just about survival. It was about creating a community, supporting an economy, and living a balanced life as prescribed by their rulebook. So, as you finish your breakfast and prepare to tackle the day's work, take a moment to appreciate the intricate system that supports your monastic life. It's a delicate balance of spiritual devotion and earthly labor, a testament to the monk's ability to adapt and thrive in a world that demanded both. And as you head out to the fields or the scriptorium, remember that every loaf of bread and pint of ale is a product of this ingenious system, a small but significant part of the grand monastic tapestry. With breakfast wrapped up and the taste of medieval ale still lingering, it's time to shuffle your way to the scriptorium. Ah, the scriptorium, the medieval monk's version of a home office, where the only Zoom meetings are with your inner thoughts and a quill. Sure, you've been up since before the sun even thought about clerking in, but now it's time to tackle the literary grind. As you step into this sacred workspace, you're about to embark on a task so painstakingly precise, it makes your last DIY project look like child's play. Welcome to the world of manuscript copying, a task that turns your hand into a historical Xerox machine. But let's not romanticize this too much. It's not like medieval monks had ergonomic chairs or wrist-friendly keyboards. This is more spine-aching than soul-quenching, and yet it's one of the most crucial jobs of the monastery. The books you're copying aren't just bedtime stories. They are the life-preservers of knowledge, keeping us from drifting into the dark abyss of ignorance. Now, why were these books so valuable, you ask? Well, producing a single manuscript was like assembling a luxury car, only slower and with more parchment. First, there's the parchment itself, made from animal skins. Calf, sheep, or goat, take your pick. It's a process that's as time-consuming as it is smelly. Prepare to shell out big time if you're in the manuscript market. A single book could cost a small fortune, sometimes equivalent to a farm or a herd of cattle. We're talking serious medieval bling here. Once you've got your parchment, it's time to get scribbling. And by scribbling, I mean a meticulous, almost meditative process of copying text by hand. Your tools of the trade include quills and ink, the medieval equivalent of a stylus and tablet. Each letter is crafted with precision, because one slip-up could mean starting over. Imagine writing an entire page, only to realize you misspelled a word. There's no backspace key here, just a lot of cursing under your breath and starting from scratch. Monasteries were the medieval world's book publishers, safeguarding ancient texts through the Dark Ages. When the Romans packed up their cultural bags and left Europe in chaos, it was the monasteries that kept the intellectual lights on. They preserved everything from religious texts to classical works by authors like Aristotle and Virgil. If it weren't for these diligent scribes, our history classes would be a lot shorter and a lot less interesting. But let's not forget the economic angle. Manuscripts were a hot commodity. Not only did they elevate the monastery's reputation, but they also brought in substantial income. Wealthy patrons, eager to flaunt their erudition or devotion, would commission works that bore their coat of arms or family insignia. It was the medieval version of having a personal library, minus the sliding ladders and leather-bound first editions. Beyond the sheer monetary value, the prestige attached to these books was immense. They were symbols of wealth, education, and piety. Owning a manuscript wasn't just a sign that you could read. It suggested you had the resources and connections to acquire such a treasure. In a world where literacy was as rare as a unicorn sighting, being able to read, let alone produce, these texts was a superpower. Monks were the original nerds, wielding quills like superheroes wield capes. Let's face it, in a time when the average person's literary repertoire was limited to deciphering simple symbols, monks were the intellectual elite. Literacy here wasn't just about reading the Bible. It was about unlocking a universe of knowledge, from philosophy to science. It was the bridge to understanding the ancients, whose thoughts and discoveries were as relevant then as they are now. So, as you sit hunched over your work, consider the weight of what you're doing. Each stroke of the quill is a defiance against the darkness of ignorance, a commitment to preserving the wisdom of ages past. Sure, it's laborious, and your back might be begging for a chiropractor, but think of the legacy. These manuscripts could outlive you by centuries, providing a glimpse into the past for those who'd come after. It's a heady responsibility, one that makes those ink stains and cramped hands worth it. But the workday isn't over yet. You've still got to balance this intellectual pursuit with the more mundane tasks of monastic life. The scriptorium might be your daytime haunt, but the monastery is a multifaceted organism that needs tending. There are meals to prepare, fields to plow, and prayers to be said. It's a juggling act of devotion and duty, where every task serves a greater purpose. In this realm, the spiritual and the practical are two sides of the same coin. The manuscripts you produce not only enrich the monastery's coffers, but also its soul. They are testaments to the monk's dedication, a blend of faith and intellect that defies the simplistic notion of medieval life, as brutish and ignorant. So, while you may not be living in a world of instant information and digital shortcuts, take solace in the fact that your slow, deliberate work is the bedrock upon which future generations will build. As you wrap up the day's work in the scriptorium, your mind might wander to the broader implications of your efforts. You're not just copying words, you're crafting connections across time and space, linking the thoughts of ancient philosophers to the minds of future scholars. In a world where the written word is the ultimate currency, you are both banker and benefactor, ensuring the flow of knowledge through the ages. So, as you roll up your sleeves and prepare for the evening's prayers, remember that your day has been spent in service of something greater. You're not just a cog in the monastic machine. You're a vital part of a tradition that values the written word as a sacred trust. And while your back might be sore and your eyes strained, take heart in the knowledge that you're keeping the flame of learning alive, one painstakingly copied letter at a time. So, you've survived another marathon session in the scriptorium, and your back's probably screaming louder than a medieval bard after a bad string break. But don't get too comfy. You've got midday prayers to attend, an essential reset for both your soul and your spine. With the echoes of chanting still reverberating in your ears, it's off to the refectory for a meal. Think of it as a pit stop before the afternoon's main event, tending to the monastery grounds. Now, don't be fooled by the serene image of monks wandering through lush gardens with nothing but thoughts of enlightenment. Monastic life was as much about wielding hoes and scythes as it was about holding prayer books. And if you thought the monks were just about saving souls, think again. They were also masters of multitasking, with a skill set that would put a modern-day survivalist to shame. First up, farming. This wasn't just a gentle pastime. It was the backbone of monastic self-sufficiency. Monasteries were early adopters of what we now call sustainable agriculture. They practiced crop rotation centuries before it became a buzzword, ensuring their soil stayed fertile and productive. Picture this: fields of barley, wheat, and oats stretching as far as the eye can see, cared for by monks who knew the land better than most modern-day agronomists. Monks were like the MacGyvers of medieval agriculture. They transformed barren landscapes into thriving farms. This wasn't just about feeding themselves, but also about supporting local communities. Monasteries owned huge swaths of land, sometimes upwards of thousands of acres, and this land was a significant source of power. Control the food, and you control the populace, or at least have a significant say in local politics. Talk about wielding influence with a plow. Then there's the brewing. Yes, you've read that right. The same monks who were chanting psalms at dawn were also brewing some of the best beer you'd find in medieval Europe. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so ale was a staple. Monks turned this necessity into an art form, mastering recipes that would rival your local craft brewery. Brewing wasn't just a hobby. It was a science, a precise alchemy of water, barley, and hops. And let's be honest, nothing says divine intervention like a perfectly brewed ale, right? On top of agriculture and brewing, monks were also skilled craftsmen. They took on tasks like carpentry, blacksmithing, and even stone masonry. These weren't just random skills picked up on a whim. They were essential for maintaining the monastery's infrastructure and for economic purposes. Craftsmanship was a serious business, and monks were nothing if not industrious. They made everything from tools to furniture, often selling these goods to support the monastery's activities. But let's not forget the political clout these monasteries held. With their vast estates and economic prowess, they were key players in the medieval power game. Monasteries often had more land than the local nobility, which made them influential landlords. Their economic activities contributed significantly to regional economies, making them indispensable allies or formidable opponents. In some cases, abbots wielded as much, or more, power than local lords, making monastery centers of both spiritual and temporal authority. So, while the stereotype of the monk as a solitary figure lost in prayer is charming, it's only part of the story. These religious communities were dynamic, multifaceted institutions. They were spiritual havens, yes, but also economic engines and political heavyweights. Monks weren't just saving souls. They were shaping society, one field, one brew, and one crafted item at a time. Imagine the scene. You standing in a field, surrounded by fellow monks, each one a cog in this well-oiled monastic machine. Each task, whether it's planting seeds, brewing ale, or crafting a wooden bench is a testament to the monastery's vitality. It's a place where faith meets functionality, where the divine and the mundane coexist in a harmony that's as intricate as it is efficient. This dual role of monasteries, spiritual centers and economic powerhouses, made them indispensable in medieval society. They were the original multitaskers, juggling a bewildering array of responsibilities, from providing spiritual guidance to serving as economic pillars for their communities. Their influence extended far beyond their cloistered walls, affecting everyone from peasants to kings. As you head back to the cloister after a day of digging, brewing, or crafting, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of the life you're living. You're not just a monk, you're a farmer, a brewer, a craftsman, and in your own way, a shaper of history. The monastery is a microcosm of medieval society, a place where the sacred and the secular are forever entwined. So, the next time someone romanticizes the life of a monk as one of serene contemplation, remember the sweat, the toil, and the sheer hard work that went into keeping the monastery ticking. It's a life of balance, of devotion and duty, where every action serves a purpose greater than oneself. And as you lay down to rest, exhausted but fulfilled, know that you're part of a tradition that's as enduring as the stone walls around you, a tradition that's left an indelible mark on history. As the shadows lengthen and the day begins its slow retreat, the monastery beckons you back to its heart, the chapel. It's time for Vespers, the evening prayer service that wraps up your day with a spiritual bow. The air inside is cool, and the stone walls seem to hold onto the day's whispers, a gentle reminder of the hours spent in diligent labor and devotion. You join your fellow monks, their voices rising in unison, creating a sacred symphony that echoes through the ancient halls. It's a moment of reflection, a pause to consider the day's blend of toil and prayer. Now, let's talk about this fascinating duality of monastic life, a tightrope walk between spiritual integrity and economic savvy. Monasteries were the original multitaskers, balancing a life of devotion with the very real need to keep the lights on, metaphorically speaking. While you might picture monks as spiritual hermits, the truth is they were also economic strategists, managing resources like medieval tycoons. It's not that they were sitting around plotting market takeovers. Rather, they understood that to fulfill their spiritual mission, they couldn't ignore the worldly necessities. Consider this. The average monastery managed vast estates, sometimes totaling thousands of acres. This wasn't just for show. These lands were meticulously cultivated to support both the monastery and the surrounding community. They grew everything from grains to grapes, and yes, they made wine too, because even in the Middle Ages, a good glass of vino was a spiritual experience. The revenue from these activities wasn't just pocket change. It was essential for funding the monastery's operations and charitable works. But managing these estates wasn't a carefree stroll through the fields. It required a sharp mind and a keen understanding of economics. Monasteries had to navigate the challenges of medieval markets, often competing with secular landowners. They engaged in trade, selling surplus produce, and sometimes even operated mills and forges. These activities not only bolstered their coffers, but also strengthened their position in society. It was a delicate balance, keeping the focus on their spiritual mission while making sure their economic engine was running smoothly. This dual role of monasteries often led to tensions. The rule of St. Benedict emphasized poverty and simplicity, yet the economic success of many monasteries led to wealth and influence. It's a bit like trying to be a minimalist while living in a mansion. Some critics, both then and now, have questioned whether monasteries sometimes lost sight of their spiritual goals in pursuit of economic prosperity. Yet, it's essential to remember that this wealth wasn't just hoarded. It was reinvested into the community, funding schools, hospitals, and other charitable endeavors. And let's not forget the sheer human element, the monks themselves. They were not immune to the temptations of wealth and power. While many lived lives of genuine humility, history is littered with accounts of abbots who wielded power like medieval CEOs, living in luxury that would make a Kardashian blush. Yet, for every tale of opulence, there are countless stories of monks who dedicated their lives to service, embodying the very principles they preached. So, where does this leave us? The legacy of monastic life is a tapestry woven with threads of devotion and pragmatism. Monasteries were not just spiritual retreats, They were engines of social change and economic stability. They preserved knowledge during Europe's darkest times, ensuring that the light of learning never went out. And while the romantic image of the monk as a solitary figure lost in prayer persists, the reality is far more nuanced and compelling. In today's fast-paced world, where information is a click away, it's easy to forget the monumental task that monasteries undertook. They were the original content creators, curating libraries of knowledge long before the internet made it cool. Their blend of spirituality and practicality offers a lesson that resonates even now. Success in any endeavor requires both vision and execution, faith and action. So, as you leave the chapel and the day draws to a close, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of devotion and diligence that defines monastic life. It's a dance that, in many ways, still echoes in our modern world, reminding us that the balance of spirit and survival is as relevant today as it was in medieval times. Once upon a time, in the sun-drenched savannas of West Africa, there was an empire so wealthy it could make Scrooge McDuck's vault look like a piggy bank. But before we dive into the golden glory of the Mali Empire, we need to rewind the tape a bit. It all begins with the fall of the Ghana Empire, a powerhouse that had its heyday between the 6th and 13th centuries, raking in gold faster than you can say charging. However, by the time the 12th century rolled around, Ghana was in more trouble than a celebrity on Twitter. Enter the Sasso Kingdom, stage left. Led by the ambitious Sumanguru Kant, the Sasso were the new kids on the block. They were like the up-and-coming indie band that eventually dethrones the chart-topping pop star. Sumanguru was an enigmatic figure, described in the epic Sundiata as a sorcerer king with a flair for the dramatic. Picture a medieval West African version of Loki, but with more gold and less CGI. He had a knack for conquering and consolidating power, establishing Sasso dominance in the region after Ghana's decline. But as is often the case in history and Hollywood, every formidable villain needs a hero. Enter Sundiata Keita, the man who would become the founder of the Mali Empire and the protagonist of our tale. Sundiata was no ordinary hero. He was born with the odds stacked against him. According to legend, he couldn't walk until he was 7, which must have made his childhood games of tag particularly challenging. His father, Nare Magan Kanate, was a minor king in the region, which in medieval terms meant he wasn't exactly rolling in riches or armies. Now, Sundiata's early life reads like a medieval soap opera. His mother, Sargalan, was a hunchbacked woman chosen by a prophecy to bear a great ruler. This made her a target for Sumanguru's ruthless ambitions. Sumanguru, the Sasso sorcerer king, was a bit of a control freak and decided to eliminate any potential threats to his reign. He forced Sundiata into exile, which sounds like a plot twist straight out of a Shakespearean play or a reality show elimination. But exile turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Sundiata spent his years away from home, rallying support from various clans who were less than thrilled with Sumanguru's heavy-handed rule. By 1235, Sundiata had amassed a coalition of warriors and was ready to reclaim his homeland and more. This leads us to the legendary Battle of Karina. Cue dramatic music. Picture two armies clashing on the dusty plains, with more tension in the air than a family Thanksgiving dinner. The Battle of Karina is one of those historical events where fact and fiction dance a delicate tango. According to legend, Sundiata and Sumanguru faced off in a magical showdown, complete with sorcery and spells. If you're imagining a Harry Potter-style duel, you're not far off, except replace wands with spears and spells with strategic maneuvers. Historical records are understandably sketchy on the magical details, but they do agree on one thing. Sundiata emerged victorious, and Sumanguru met his end. This victory wasn't just a personal win for Sundiata, it was a turning point for the entire region. By toppling Sumanguru, Sundiata effectively ended the Sasso's brief reign and laid the foundation for the Mali Empire. It was like the ultimate mic drop moment of the 13th century. With the Sasso out of the way, Sundiata set about uniting the various tribes and territories into a cohesive empire, using a mix of diplomacy, military might, and probably a well-timed pep talk or two. As the first emperor of Mali, Sundiata Keita was a savvy leader who understood the importance of trade and resources. He turned his attention to the trans-Saharan trade routes, which were the medieval equivalent of the Silk Road and Silicon Valley, rolled into one. These routes were the lifeblood of West Africa, facilitating the exchange of gold, salt, and ideas across vast distances. Sanjara's Mali became a hub of commerce and culture, attracting merchants and scholars like bees to honey. So there you have it, the humble beginnings of the Mali Empire, forged in the fires of battle and tempered by the strategic genius of Sanjara Keita. This was just the beginning of an empire that would grow to become a beacon of wealth and learning in the medieval world. But before we get too carried away with visions of gold and glory, let's remember where it all started, with a boy who couldn't walk, a sorcerer king, and a battle that changed the course of West African history. Hold onto your hats, because the rise of the Mali Empire is just getting started. Sanjara Keita had vision, and it wasn't just about winning battles or crafting epic tales for future historians to drool over. His true genius lay in recognizing the golden ticket of his era, the trans-Saharan trade routes. Picture him as the ultimate medieval entrepreneur who could spot a market opportunity faster than a Wall Street trader on Red Bull. Sanjara knew that the backbone of any empire worth its salt, pun absolutely intended, was trade. And in the case of the Mali Empire, this trade was built on two glittering pillars, gold and salt. Let's start with gold, the glittering metal that has fueled more dreams and schemes than any other. We're talking serious amounts here, enough to make even the most blinged-out modern billionaire feel a tad underdressed. The Mali Empire's secret source came from the gold mines of Bambuk and Wangara, located along the Senegal River. This was the medieval equivalent of striking oil in Texas. According to various accounts, these mines were so productive that by the 14th century, Mali was churning out nearly 2/3 of the world's gold supply. That's right. 2 out of every 3 gold coins jingling around the globe likely had their origins in the dusty plains of West Africa. Now, if you're wondering what all this gold was worth in today's terms, imagine the GDP of a small country, say Luxembourg, wrapped up in shiny, precious metal. Some estimates say that Mansa Musa, the 9th emperor of Mali, was worth an eye-watering $400 billion in today's dollars. Yes, billion with a B. And no, that's not a typo. To put it in perspective, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk would have to team up to even come close to that kind of wealth. Mansa Musa wasn't just rich. He was, I can tip the scales of global economies, rich. But gold was only half the story. The other half was salt, which might sound less glamorous, but was just as crucial. In the sweltering heat of West Africa, salt was life. Literally. It was essential for preserving food and maintaining health, making it more valuable than gold in some regions. The salt mines of Taghaza, located in the Sahara Desert, were the source of this precious commodity. Caravans of camels, think of them as the semi-trucks of the desert, would transport slabs of salt across treacherous sand dunes to hungry markets. These caravans were like mobile banks, laden with fortunes waiting to be traded. Here's where the magic happened. Mali's strategic location made it the linchpin of these trade routes. The empire functioned like a giant toll booth for the Sahara, collecting taxes and tolls from the caravans that passed through its territory. The wealth generated from these trade routes turned Mali into a medieval Wall Street, bustling with merchants, scholars, and adventurers. Cities like Timbuktu and Gao became cultural melting pots where ideas and goods exchanged hands faster than tweets on a trending topic. But let's not get too carried away by the romance of golden riches and bustling markets. The reality on the ground was a bit grittier. Imagine the logistics nightmare of managing caravan routes stretching over 1,000 miles across the scorching Sahara. These weren't leisurely road trips. They were perilous journeys, fraught with dangers like sandstorms and bandit attacks. It was a high-stakes game where fortunes could be won or lost with a single misstep. And while gold and salt were the stars of the show, they weren't the only players on the field. The empire's economy was diversified with agricultural products like millet and sorghum, and artisanal crafts such as textiles and pottery. This was an economy firing on all cylinders, with a complex web of trade networks that extended beyond Africa to the Mediterranean and the Middle East. As we peel back the layers of Mali's economic engine, it's essential to debunk a few myths. The story of Mali's wealth often gets romanticized into a glittering fairy tale, where everyone lived like royalty. The truth, however, was a bit more nuanced. While the ruling elite enjoyed opulent lifestyles, most of the population led simpler lives, focused on agriculture and local trade. The empire's wealth was concentrated at the top, creating a society where power and prosperity were closely intertwined. In this era of prosperity, Mansa Musa stands out as a particularly dazzling figure, not just for his wealth, but for how he used it. This wasn't some Scrooge McDuck hoarding his gold coins. Musa was a patron of the arts and education, investing in the cultural and intellectual fabric of his empire. His legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 wasn't just a religious journey. It was a grandiose display of Mali's wealth on the international stage. Picture a caravan so extravagant it included tens of thousands of attendants and camels laden with gold. Musa's generosity was so extreme that it allegedly caused a gold crash in Cairo due to the sudden influx of precious metal. Talk about making a splash. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, the empire's wealth was also its Achilles heel. The Mali Empire's prosperity made it a target for envy and ambition, both from within and beyond its borders. The success of the gold and salt trade was a double-edged sword, bringing both prosperity and the inevitable challenges of managing such a vast and diverse empire. So, as we marvel at the staggering wealth and commercial prowess of the Mali Empire, let's not forget the human stories behind the gold and salt. The merchants navigating the harsh desert, the miners toiling in the scorching sun, and the rulers balancing the scales of power and prosperity. The Mali Empire was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, trade, and resourcefulness, a story that continues to capture our imagination long after the last echoes of its golden age have faded into history. But hold on to your curiosity, because the saga of Mali has more twists and turns than a camel's trek across the Sahara, and we're just getting started. As the echoes of Mali's golden age shimmer in the distance, let's dive into the life of Mansa Musa, a man whose name is synonymous with wealth, so vast it makes the modern billionaire club look like mere pocket change. Musa wasn't just any ruler. He was like the ultimate medieval influencer, whose every move rippled across continents. Born around 1280, Mansa Musa ascended the throne in 1312, and boy, did he know how to make an entrance. By the time he ruled, Mali wasn't just a player on the world stage. It was the headliner, thanks in no small part to Musa's flair for the dramatic. But the real blockbuster came in 1324 with his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca. Imagine a caravan so lavish. It made the Seven Wonders look like budget motels. Now, let's talk numbers, because Musa's pilgrimage wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was a full-blown spectacle. He traveled with a retinue of 60,000 people. That's right, 60,000. This included 12,000 slaves, each carrying 8 kilograms of gold bars. If you're doing the math, that's over 600 kilograms of gold, enough to make King Midas green with envy and a Fort Knox heist look like a petty theft. Musa's pilgrimage was like a traveling economic stimulus package. In Cairo, he reportedly spent so much gold that the local economy went into a tailspin, causing inflation that lasted years. Picture it, a gold rush that turned into a financial headache. It was the medieval equivalent of someone dropping a few $1 billion on a small-town economy overnight. Egypt's economy was left reeling, and the price of gold took the same nosedive you'd expect from a stock market crash. But why the extravagant show? Was Musa just a guy who loved a good shopping spree? Well, not quite. Musa was shrewd, understanding that a bit of international PR could do wonders for his empire. His pilgrimage served as a colossal billboard for Mali, announcing its wealth and power to the Islamic world and beyond. Think of it as the original influencer marketing campaign, minus the Instagram filters. Musa's generosity wasn't just about handing out gold like flyers at a festival. It was a calculated move designed to put Mali on the map. And boy, did it work. By the time he returned from Mecca, Mali was the talk of the medieval world, its name etched into the minds of traders and scholars from Cairo to Constantinople. If there was a medieval Forbes list, Musa would have graced the cover more times than he could count. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While Musa's pilgrimage painted him as a benevolent ruler with a Midas touch, The reality was a bit more complex. This journey, while legendary, also laid bare the empire's dependence on its gold reserves. And as with all resources, over-reliance can lead to vulnerability. Musa's ostentatious display was both a showcase of wealth and a hint at the underlying fragility of an economy tied so closely to a single commodity. Back in Mali, Musa's wealth wasn't just for show. He invested heavily in education and infrastructure, turning Timbuktu into a hub of learning. Musa funded the construction of the Jingreba Mosque, an architectural marvel, and established the University of Sankor. These institutions attracted scholars and artisans from across the Islamic world, transforming Mali into a beacon of knowledge and culture. It was like the Silicon Valley of medieval academia, where ideas flowed as freely as gold. Yet, even as we celebrate the glittering achievements of Musa's reign, it's essential to remember the broader context. While the elite basked in opulence, the average Malian lived a life far removed from this splendor. The empire's wealth was a double-edged sword, bringing both prosperity and the challenges of maintaining such a vast territory. Musa's reign was a high-wire act, balancing the scales of power and wealth in a world where envy and ambition lurked at every corner. Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca was a masterstroke of diplomacy and self-promotion, elevating Mali's status on the world stage. But it also served as a reminder of the volatile nature of wealth and power. The gold that fueled Mali's rise was both its greatest asset and its Achilles heel, a reality that would shape the empire's fortunes in the years to come. So, as we marvel at Mansa Musa's legacy, let's remember that behind the glittering facade lay the complexities of an empire grappling with the eternal dance between fortune and fate. The story of Mali is far from over, and as we journey deeper into its history, we'll uncover more tales of ambition, intrigue, and the timeless quest for power. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Mali Empire continues to unfold with more twists than a desert caravan route. And so, as the Mali Empire basked in the afterglow of Mansa Musa's gold-studded parade across the desert, a new chapter was quietly unfolding in the heart of the empire, Timbuktu. If you've ever used the phrase, "from here to Timbuktu," to describe the middle of nowhere, you owe it to yourself to get acquainted with the real deal. Timbuktu wasn't just some dusty outpost at the edge of civilization. It was the intellectual epicenter of West Africa, the medieval version of a Silicon Valley startup hub, but with fewer hoodies and more manuscripts. Timbuktu's rise as a cultural and intellectual beacon kicked into high gear during the 14th century, largely thanks to the investment in education and infrastructure by Mansa Musa and his successors. Picture a city bustling with scholars and scribes, where camels laden with books were as common as those carrying gold. It was here that the University of Sankor emerged, a storied institution that rivaled the likes of Oxford and the Sorbonne. With a curriculum that spanned theology, astronomy, law, and medicine, Timbuktu attracted students and intellectuals from far and wide, eager to exchange ideas in this desert oasis. Let's talk numbers for a moment. At its height, Timbuktu housed around 25,000 students, a staggering figure considering the city's total population hovered around 100,000. This means 1 in 4 people was a student, giving it a student-to-citizen ratio that would make any modern college town green with envy. And the library collections. They boasted anywhere from 700,000 to 1,000,000 manuscripts, many of which still survive today, offering a tantalizing glimpse into the scholarly pursuits of the time. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of ancient academia. While it's true that Timbuktu was a glittering hub of knowledge, the daily grind of medieval scholarship was more grueling than glamorous. Picture cramped, dimly lit rooms where scribes hunched over parchment, painstakingly copying texts by hand. Forget digital databases. If you wanted to read something, you had to hope the local scribe wasn't on a tea break. And those manuscripts, they were often guarded more fiercely than dragon hoards its treasure, locked away from the prying eyes of the uninitiated. The reality of Timbuktu's intellectual scene was that of a bustling yet gritty network of scholars and traders, each driven by the promise of knowledge and the allure of profit. The city functioned as a vibrant marketplace for ideas, where the exchange of thoughts was as crucial as the trade of goods. Merchants and scholars would haggle over the price of a manuscript with the same fervor they might negotiate for a camel or a sack of salt. Knowledge was currency, and in Timbuktu it flowed freely, albeit with the occasional hiccup. Now, let's bust a few myths, shall we? The romantic image of Timbuktu as an isolated utopia of learning conveniently ignores the complex realities of medieval life. For one, the city's prosperity was inextricably tied to the trans-Saharan trade routes, which were as unpredictable as a soap opera plot twist. One bad sandstorm or a bandit raid could disrupt the flow of goods and ideas, sending ripples through the city's economy and academic life. Timbuktu's scholars were well aware that their intellectual pursuits were underpinned by the more mundane realities of trade and politics. Moreover, while the city's reputation as a center of learning was well-deserved, it wasn't immune to the social hierarchies and inequalities of the time. The scholarly life was often reserved for the elite, with access to education and manuscripts tightly controlled by those in power. It's a sobering reminder that even in this intellectual haven, the pursuit of knowledge was as much about privilege as it was about passion. Timbuktu's legacy as a beacon of learning and culture is undeniable, but it's important to remember the city's story as one of both inspiration and pragmatism. The scholars who flocked to its sandy streets were driven not just by the pursuit of wisdom, but by the intricate dance between commerce and culture that defined the Mali Empire. They navigated a world where the line between myth and reality was as fine as the grains of sand that surrounded them. So, as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of the Mali Empire, let's keep in mind the duality of its story. It's a tale of glittering riches and scholarly splendor, yes, but also one of grit and tenacity, where the harsh realities of medieval life were never far from the surface. And as the sun sets over the vast Sahara, leaving Timbuktu bathed in the warm glow of history, we're reminded that the quest for knowledge is a journey as timeless as the desert sands themselves. Stay tuned, because the saga of Mali is far from over, with more twists and turns awaiting us just beyond the horizon. Yet even as the scholars of Timbuktu filled their minds with knowledge and their libraries with manuscripts, the winds of change were already whispering through the vast Sahara. The Mali Empire, that once glittering jewel of West Africa, was beginning to show the telltale cracks of decline. Now, if you thought Mali's rise was a whirlwind of ambition and gold, brace yourself for the somewhat messier story of its fall. Spoiler alert, it involves more drama than a season finale of your favorite political thriller. Let's set the stage. By the late 14th century, the empire was more akin to a patchwork quilt than the cohesive powerhouse it once was. Internal strife was the order of the day. The death of Mansa Musa in 1337 left a power vacuum that was about as stable as a game of Jenga played during an earthquake. Subsequent rulers struggled to maintain the centralized power that Musa had wielded so effectively. Imagine a parade of leaders, each trying to don Musa's crown, but finding it a rather poor fit. The result? A series of successions that were, frankly, as turbulent as a toddler's tantrum. Meanwhile, external pressures were mounting. The Songhai, a neighboring powerhouse with a serious case of expansion fever, was eyeing Mali's territories like a kid drooling over the last piece of cake. By the 15th century, the Songhai Empire, led by the ambitious Sani Ali, was making its move. Mali's grip on its provinces was slipping faster than a buttered banana peel. The Songhai's rise was a classic case of one empire's loss being another's gain. They swept through Mali's territories, gobbling up cities like Timbuktu and Gao that had once been the beating heart of Mali's cultural and economic prowess. And let's not forget the shifting trade routes, the silent saboteurs of empires. As the world moved into the 16th century, the trans-Saharan trade routes that had once been Mali's lifeline began to shift, much like the sands of the desert itself. European powers, with their shiny new ships and insatiable appetite for trade, started to bypass the Sahara, opting instead for coastal routes. It was like the medieval version of a blockbuster store going out of business because everyone decided streaming was the new cool. Mali's economy, once bolstered by the golden streams of trade, began to falter. The empire's wealth was no longer a steady river, but a shrinking puddle. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The romantic notion of Mali's decline often paints a picture of a once great empire fading quietly into the annals of history, like a dignified elder retiring to a life of serene reflection. The reality was a bit grittier. The empire's fall was marked by a series of brutal power struggles, betrayals, and the harsh reality that maintaining an empire is a bit like juggling flaming swords. Drop one, and things get messy fast. The splendor of the past couldn't shield Mali from the relentless march of time and change. But before we sound the final death knell, let's reflect on the legacy that the Mali Empire left behind. This was, after all, an empire that had reached heights few could dream of, and its cultural and intellectual achievements continued to echo long after the political entity crumbled. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, for instance, remain a testament to Mali's intellectual prowess, offering insights into a world where knowledge was as prized as gold. They serve as a reminder that while empires may fall, the ideas they foster can endure, whispering through the corridors of time. The Mali Empire's legacy is a kaleidoscope of wealth and wisdom, marred by the realities of power and ambition. It's a lesson in the duality of human nature. Yes, it's tempting to remember only the glittering gold and the scholarly achievements, but we must also acknowledge the human cost, the toil of miners, the ambitions of rulers, and the shifting sands of fortune that shaped the empire's fate. So, as we close the book on the saga of the Mali Empire, let's indulge in a bit of introspection. History, much like a grand tapestry, is woven from both the romantic threads of legend and the gritty fibers of reality. It's a story of triumphs and trials, of golden dreams and the harsh light of day. And while it's easy to glamorize the past, let's not forget that beneath the glittering surface lies the complex dance of human ambition, resilience, and folly. In the end, the story of Mali is a reminder that empires rise and fall, but the echoes of their legacy can endure, offering lessons for future generations. As we look back on this remarkable chapter of history, let's remember it not just for its golden glory, but for the rich tapestry of human experience that it represents. So, here's to the Mali Empire. May its story continue to inspire, to caution, and to remind us of the enduring quest for knowledge and power that defines the human journey. In the bustling cradle of civilization, known as Mesopotamia, where rivers ran like veins through the Fertile Crescent, a man named Sargon was cooking up an empire-building scheme that would put modern corporate takeovers to shame. Picture Sargon the Great not so much as a dusty historical figure, but as a dynamic startup founder with an eye for hostile acquisitions. Sargon was the kind of guy who didn't just want a piece of the pie. He wanted the whole bakery, and maybe a few more down the street for good measure. Before Sargon's rise, Mesopotamia was a patchwork quilt of city-states like Kish, Uruk, and Lagash, each one fiercely independent, like a bunch of siblings fighting over who got the bigger bedroom. These city-states were constantly squabbling over resources, borders, and who had the right to brag about having the biggest ziggurat. It was a political landscape, as chaotic as a game of Risk after everyone's had too much coffee. Enter Sargon, the ambitious ruler of Akkad, who figured that if he could unite these bickering city-states, he could not only control the trade routes, but also sit at the head of the first real empire in history. Sargon wasn't born into power with a silver sickle in his hand. Legend has it he started life in humble beginnings, possibly as a gardener in Kish. But like any good underdog story, he had ambition to spare. With a keen sense for strategy, and probably a killer elevator pitch, Sargon seized power in Kish around 2334 BCE. From there, he set his sights on the other city-states, each conquest like adding another notch to his empire-building belt. Now, when it comes to territorial bragging rights, Sargon was no slouch. He famously boasted of ruling from the upper sea to the lower sea, which today translates to the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Imagine dropping that in a board meeting. Oh, by the way, I just conquered everything from New York to LA. It's the kind of statement that makes you wonder if he had a map in his palace marked with little pins and a big red marker for places to conquer next. Sargon's military campaigns were as bold as his claims. He marched his armies across the Mesopotamian plains, employing what we might call the hostile takeover model of empire expansion. But this wasn't just about flexing military muscle. Each city he took over brought economic advantages, from controlling trade routes to gaining access to valuable resources like grain and metals. Sargon understood that power wasn't just in the number of soldiers, but in the wealth of cities, and the loyalty of their citizens. The pre-empire landscape of Mesopotamia was ripe for unification, and Sargon had the vision and the audacity to make it happen. The city-states, for all their independence, shared a common language and culture, which made Sargon's job a bit easier. It's as if he was merging companies that already used the same software, spoke the same corporate jargon, and had similar office cultures. This cultural unity was a crucial factor in Sargon's success, allowing him to knit these disparate states into a cohesive empire. But let's not sugarcoat it. Sargon's rise to power was anything but peaceful. His path was strewn with the usual imperial debris, battles, sieges, and plenty of double-dealing. Yet, for all the blood and betrayal, Sargon's empire set the stage for what an empire could be. It was a blueprint of sorts, showing future generations how to manage vast territories and diverse peoples under a single banner. The Akkadian Empire under Sargon was not just about geographical expansion. It was about setting a precedent. It was like the first draft of a business plan that would be revised and expanded by empires to come. Sargon's model of centralized power and organized military might would echo through history, influencing empires from Babylon to Rome and beyond. So, while Sargon might not have had the internet to boast about his achievements, his legacy was a tweet heard round the ancient world. His empire was the first of its kind, and in many ways, it was as much about innovation as it was about expansion. As Sargon continued his conquests, the world watched a new kind of power take shape, one where ambition and strategy could redraw the lines of history, one city-state at a time. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how Sargon not only built his empire, but managed to keep a grip on it tighter than a toddler with a cookie. Running an empire isn't just a matter of saying, "I conquer you," and expecting everyone to cheerfully fall in line. No, it's a much messier affair, involving logistics that would make even the most seasoned event planner break into a cold sweat. Sargon controlled around 34,000 square miles, about the size of present-day Portugal, and he did this with a mix of strategic genius and sheer audacity. First off, let's talk about the military machine. Picture Sargon's army as the ancient equivalent of a well-oiled startup on steroids. Forget the image of a ragtag bunch of warriors swinging swords willy-nilly. Sargon's troops were professional soldiers, trained and paid, not with stock options, but with good, old-fashioned grain and silver. Unlike the freelancers of other city-states, these guys were on payroll, making them more reliable than your average mercenary. Think of them as the elite forces of their day, minus the high-tech gear and plus a whole lot of bronze. But conquering is only half the battle. The real challenge is in the keeping, and here's where Sargon's empire-building chops really shine. To maintain control over such a vast territory, Sargon had to become a master of logistics. That meant setting up supply lines that could keep his army fed, armed, and ready to squash any rebellions faster than you can say insurrection. And supply lines back then went exactly next-day delivery. Imagine trying to coordinate shipments over hundreds of miles with nothing but donkeys and boats. Ancient supply chain issues were no joke, folks. Communication was another beast altogether. Forget about firing off a quick email or, heaven forbid, a text. Sargon's version of ancient Wi-Fi involved a network of messengers and clay tablets. These tablets were the tweets of their day, inscribed with cuneiform and sent off on foot or by chariot. It was a system that was surprisingly effective, though maybe not as fast as fiber optic. But hey, when your nearest neighbor is a 2-week walk away, you learn to appreciate the art of patience. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it, because Sargon's story isn't all smooth sailing and triumphant parades. Despite his reputation as an invincible conqueror, he faced plenty of revolts. Turns out not everyone was thrilled about being part of the Sargon fan club. City-states like and Lagash weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat, and they certainly didn't get the memo that resistance was futile. Revolts were a constant headache, as common as bad hair days, and Sargon had to keep a sharp eye out to squash them before they spread like wildfire. Then there were the neighbors, those pesky neighboring regions that just wouldn't play nice. Elam, for instance, was a particular thorn in Sargon's side. Positioned to the east, Elam was like the grumpy neighbor who refuses to return your lawnmower and occasionally throws rocks over the fence. Sargon had to deal with these irritations while juggling the administrative demands of his sprawling empire. It's a wonder he didn't develop a stress-related eye twitch. Economically, Sargon was no slouch either. Sure, he wasn't trading stocks, but he understood the importance of trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. These routes were the ancient equivalent of the Silk Road, bustling with merchants exchanging goods like textiles, metals, and grain. Think of it as the original Amazon Prime, albeit with a slightly longer delivery window. Sargon knew that controlling these routes meant controlling wealth, and wealth meant power. It's the age-old equation that's kept empire builders awake for millennia. But let's not get too starry-eyed about Sargon's achievements. The logistics of running such a massive empire were fraught with challenges that would test even the most seasoned ruler. Supply lines could be disrupted by anything from bandits to bad weather, and communication delays could mean the difference between quelling a revolt and losing a city. Sargon's empire was like a game of Jenga, constantly teetering on the brink of collapse, and it took all his cunning to keep the tower standing. Sargon's legacy is a testament to the power of ambition and innovation in the face of adversity. He wasn't some mythical hero endowed with supernatural powers. He was a man with a vision and the nerve to see it through. Yet, for all his achievements, Sargon's empire was as fragile as it was formidable, a fact that would become all too clear in the years following his reign. But that's a story for another time. For now, suffice it to say that Sargon's empire was a masterstroke of ancient ingenuity, a sprawling testament to what one man could achieve with a bit of grit and a lot of nerve. Now, if you thought running a sprawling empire was all about war and glory, think again. Sargon didn't keep the lights on in Akkad by just flexing his military muscles. Nope, he had to turn to the less glamorous but utterly crucial realm of economics. Think of Sargon as the CEO who realized that keeping the empire's coffers full was just as important as expanding its borders. First up, let's talk taxes. Everyone's favorite topic, right? Sargon knew that to keep his empire humming, he needed a steady stream of revenue. Enter the taxation of conquered cities. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill property tax. No, Sargon imposed tributes that would make a modern tax auditor break out in a cold sweat. Imagine being a city-state and receiving a bill from Sargon that reads something like, "Congratulations on being part of the Akkadian Empire. Please remit payment in grain, livestock, and precious metals at your earliest convenience." It was a shakedown that even the IRS would admire. Taxes weren't just about lining the emperor's pockets, though. They were a way to keep the empire running smoothly. These tributes funded everything from military campaigns to public works, making sure that Sargon's empire didn't collapse like a poorly built sandcastle. It was an economic model that relied on the conquered cities to bankroll their own subjugation, a kind of ancient pay-to-play system. Now, let's dig into the silver standard, a nifty little economic innovation that Sargon implemented. In a world where bartering was as common as sunburns in the desert, Sargon introduced a standardized monetary system based on silver, the Bitcoin of its day. This wasn't just about simplifying transactions. It was about creating a stable economic foundation that could support an empire spread over 34,000 square miles. It's like Sargon said, enough with the chickens and goats. Let's trade in something that doesn't squawk or bleat. By establishing a silver standard, Sargon was able to streamline trade across his empire. Merchants could now trade goods without the hassle of bartering, making the flow of commerce as smooth as a well-oiled chariot wheel. This economic stability was crucial for maintaining control over such a vast territory. And let's be honest, it probably made Sargon a popular guy among merchants who were tired of lugging around livestock for every transaction. But who were the unsung heroes behind this economic machine? Enter the bureaucrats, the ancient equivalent of today's overworked interns. These guys were the backbone of the Akkadian Empire, scribbling away on clay tablets like their lives depended on it, because they kind of did. Imagine the most tedious Excel spreadsheet you've ever seen. Now picture it in cuneiform on a slab of clay. These bureaucrats were the ones who kept the empire running, making sure that taxes were collected, trade was regulated, and that Sargon's grand plans didn't come crashing down like a toppled ziggurat. Let's not sugarcoat it. Being a bureaucrat in the Akkadian Empire was no walk in the hanging gardens. These guys were buried under so much clay, they probably had permanent dust under their fingernails. They were the ones who had to make sense of it all, deciphering Sargon's economic policies and translating them into actionable plans. Think of them as the middle managers of Mesopotamia, caught between the emperor's demands and the realities of running an empire. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the legendary city of Akkad, Sargon's pride and joy. Akkad was more than just the empire's capital. It was the heart of Sargon's economic vision. Situated near the Tigris River, this city was a bustling hub of commerce and administration. It was like the Wall Street of the ancient world, with traders and bureaucrats hustling to keep the empire's economy afloat. Sargon poured resources into Akkad, transforming it into a showcase of Akkadian power and prosperity. The city was a testament to the empire's wealth, boasting grand temples, palaces, and public works projects that would make even the most seasoned architect do a double take. It was a place where the empire's ambitions were made manifest, a tangible reminder of Sargon's audacious vision. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Akkad. For all its grandeur, it was also a city teetering on the edge, reliant on the constant influx of resources and tributes from the far reaches of the empire. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required constant vigilance and a touch of luck to maintain. The city's prosperity was as much a testament to Sargon's strategic genius as it was to the precarious nature of empire building. As for Sargon's economic policies, well, let's just say they were as much about innovation as they were about necessity. In many ways, Sargon was like a startup founder who realized that staying ahead of the game required more than just bold ideas. It required practical solutions to the everyday challenges of empire management. Whether it was standardizing currency, streamlining trade, or implementing a taxation system, Sargon's economic strategies were a masterstroke of ancient innovation. Yet, for all his brilliance, Sargon's economic model was not without its flaws. The reliance on tributes from conquered cities created a system that was, in many ways, unsustainable. It was an empire built on a foundation that could crumble under the weight of rebellion or economic disruption. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that reflected the precarious nature of Sargon's empire. By now, you might be wondering how Sargon managed to keep all these plates spinning without losing his mind. The truth is, it wasn't easy. Maintaining an empire of this magnitude required a level of administrative acumen that was nothing short of Herculean. It was a constant juggling act, balancing the demands of expansion with the realities of governance. Yet, for all the challenges, Sargon's empire remained a beacon of what was possible in the ancient world. It was a testament to the power of vision and innovation, a reminder that even in the harshest of landscapes, greatness could be achieved. As we continue to unravel the story of the Akkadian Empire, remember that behind every legendary conqueror, there's a host of unsung heroes, bureaucrats, merchants, soldiers, who make the impossible possible. And so, as Sargon's empire continued to grow, so too did the complexities of managing it. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's just say that the story of the Akkadian Empire is far from over, and the challenges that lay ahead would test even the most seasoned ruler. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be as thrilling as the last. And as Sargon's empire ballooned like an overstuffed pita, it wasn't just the borders that expanded. His empire's cultural reach began to stretch its legs in a big way. The Akkadian Empire wasn't just a map of conquest. It was like a cultural heirloom, hosting a blend of ideas, art, and language that would leave a mark on history deeper than the Tigris River. Let's dive into Akkadian, the language that became the ancient world's equivalent of English today. Imagine it as the lingua franca that tied together this sprawling empire, like the duct tape holding together an overly complicated IKEA project. Akkadian wasn't just a means of communication. It was a badge of empire, a unifying force that transcended city walls and regional dialects. Much like English dominates international business today, Akkadian was the language of commerce, law, and diplomacy, your go-to if you wanted to get ahead in the ancient world. The spread of Akkadian as a common language is no small feat when you consider the linguistic soup that was Mesopotamia. Before Akkad flexed its imperial muscles, the region was a patchwork of tongues, each city-state clinging to its own linguistic quirks, like a hipster to vinyl records. But Sargon's empire needed more than regional flavor. It needed coherence. So, Akkadian rose in prominence, becoming the official language of administration and trade, a sort of ancient Rosetta Stone for the empire's diverse peoples. But let's not romanticize this too much. While Akkadian was spreading like wildfire, it wasn't all poetry and prose. The language was as much about bureaucracy as it was about beauty. Picture harried scribes hunched over clay tablets, etching out tax records, legal codes, and trade agreements in cuneiform, a script that made Egyptian hieroglyphs look like child's play. These scribes were the unsung heroes, ensuring the empire didn't crumble under its own weight. Imagine trying to decipher one of these tablets today. You'd need the patience of a saint and the eyesight of a hawk. Now, onto art and literature, because the Akkadian Empire wasn't just about boardroom takeovers and military parades. It also saw a flourishing of creativity that was as dazzling as it was strategic. The empire's artists and writers weren't just creating for the sake of beauty. They were crafting a narrative, a legacy that would echo through the ages. Think of it as the empire's PR campaign, a way to justify its existence and celebrate its achievements. Take the famous epic of Gilgamesh, often hailed as one of the earliest great works of literature. While the stories of Gilgamesh predate the Akkadian Empire, it was during this time that they were compiled into a cohesive epic, a tale of adventure, friendship, and the eternal quest for immortality. It's the ancient world's answer to The Lord of the Rings, with fewer Tolkien elves and more existential crises. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a cultural touchstone, a way for the Akkadians to explore human nature and the divine. Art wasn't just confined to literature. The empire's visual art was as bold as its military campaigns. Akkadian artists left behind stunning sculptures and reliefs that depicted everything from victorious battles to religious rituals. These artifacts weren't just for show. They were propaganda pieces, reminders of the empire's might and divine favor. Imagine walking into a palace and being greeted by a wall carving of Sargon himself, standing tall and triumphant, ancient marketing at its finest. But let's not get carried away with the romance of cultural flourishing. All this creativity didn't happen in a vacuum. It existed against a backdrop of constant warfare and political tension. The Akkadian Empire was as much about survival as it was about splendor. Every artistic achievement was a testament to resilience, a way to assert identity and unity in a world that was anything but stable. There's a tendency to view this period through rose-tinted glasses, to imagine a golden age of cultural harmony. Yet, the reality was far more complex. For every artistic triumph, there was a city in revolt, a border under threat. It was a time of contrasts, where the beauty of Akkadian culture was often overshadowed by the harsh realities of empire building. Economically, the empire's cultural advances were both a boon and a burden. On one hand, the spread of Akkadian language and culture facilitated trade and communication, smoothing the wheels of commerce like ancient WD-40. On the other hand, maintaining such a vast and diverse empire required constant vigilance and resources, a balancing act worthy of any modern CFO's nightmares. So, while the Akkadian Empire was busy setting cultural trends, it was also grappling with the age-old challenges of governance and control. It's a reminder that even the most dazzling achievements come with a price, that every cultural renaissance is shadowed by the realities of power and politics. And as we continue to explore the Akkadian Empire, remember that its story is far from over. The cultural legacy of Akkad would ripple through history, influencing civilizations long after its political power had waned. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just say that the Akkadian Empire was as much about ideas as it was about armies, a testament to the enduring power of culture in shaping history. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be as intriguing as the last. But just as the Akkadian Empire was riding high on its cultural triumphs, the tides of fortune began to shift, and not in a let's-take-a-relaxing-cruise kind of way. No, the empire's decline was more like a slow-motion train wreck that everyone saw coming, but couldn't quite stop. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how an empire that seemed as enduring as the pyramids hit the skids. First up, let's talk internal strife, the kind that would make even the most dramatic reality TV show look like a knitting circle. After Sargon's death, his successors found that holding together an empire won by force required more than just a strong sword arm. His grandson, Naram-Sin, tried to keep the momentum going, even going so far as to declare himself a god. Because what could possibly go wrong with a bit of divine self-promotion? But as it turns out, claiming godhood doesn't magically solve political problems, and his reign faced revolts that would make any ruler reconsider their career choices. City-states once united under Sargon's vision began to chafe under Akkadian rule, like disgruntled employees at a company that forgot to give out Christmas bonuses. The Sumerian city-states, in particular, were not keen on staying under the Akkadian thumb. They rose up with the kind of tenacity that only comes from being micromanaged for too long. These revolts weren't mere hiccups. They were seismic shifts in power, as the once cohesive empire started to fray at the edges. External pressures didn't help either. Imagine the Akkadian Empire as a beleaguered CEO dealing with hostile takeover attempts from all sides. The Gutians, a group of nomadic tribes from the Zagros Mountains, were like those pesky competitors who just wouldn't quit. They didn't care much for Akkadian diplomacy or cultural achievements. They saw a weakened empire and went in for the kill. By around 2154 BCE, the Gutians had sacked Akkad itself, effectively putting an end to the first empire the world had ever seen. And if internal strife and external invasions weren't enough, Mother Nature decided to join the party with a gut punch of a drought. Picture this, a multi-decade climate event that would give modern climate scientists nightmares. This wasn't just a dry spell. It was an arid apocalypse that wreaked havoc on agriculture, the empire's lifeblood. Crops failed, food supplies dwindled, and the economic foundation of the empire crumbled faster than a sandcastle at high tide. With a dwindling food supply came a chain reaction of social unrest and economic turmoil. When people are starving, they start questioning the value of sticking around under rulers who can't keep the grain silos full. The empire's infrastructure, once its strength, became a liability as the resources needed to maintain it dried up along with the rivers. It's a reminder of the harsh reality that even the most impressive achievements are at the mercy of the environment. So, where does this leave us in terms of legacy? Well, the Akkadian Empire might have crumbled, but its influence endured like a particularly catchy tune you just can't get out of your head. The idea of centralized power, a professional army, and a common language became the blueprint for future empires. Babylon, Assyria, and even Rome took a page out of Sargon's playbook, proving that while the Akkadians might have been the first to fumble the empire ball, they were also the first to pick it up and run with it. In many ways, Sargon's empire was the Silicon Valley of its time, minus the tech, and plus a lot of clay tablets. It was a hub of innovation, a place where ideas were exchanged and refined. The Akkadians weren't just conquerors. They were cultural architects, laying the groundwork for what empires could be. It's a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and ingenuity, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So, as you drift off with visions of ancient empires dancing in your head, remember that Sargon and his empire were more than just historical footnotes. They were pioneers in the grand experiment of human civilization, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, but their ideas can echo through the ages. And in the end, perhaps that's the real legacy, a testament to the resilience of human ambition with all its triumphs and follies. The Mediterranean around 1050 BCE was the ancient equivalent of the internet, a chaotic, bustling network of trade routes where everyone was hustling for a piece of the action. And right at the center of this maritime web were the Phoenicians, the ancient world's answer to Amazon Prime. These folks didn't just peddle goods. They practically invented the concept of next-day delivery with their nimble, cedar-built ships that darted across the sea like caffeinated seagulls. But here's the kicker. While they were masters of the sea, they were also scribes of the land. The Phoenicians weren't just hauling purple dye and luxury timber. They were carrying something far more valuable, an innovation that would change the course of history more profoundly than a viral tick-tock dance. This was the Phoenician alphabet, a sleek, 22-character system that could be scribbled as quickly as a merchant could cut a deal. Think of it as the linguistic equivalent of a smartphone, pocket-sized, user-friendly, and infinitely adaptable. Before this, writing was about as accessible as a locked diary with no key. Picture the Sumerians with their cuneiform, each word painstakingly chiseled into clay tablets, a process as laborious as carving a statue with a toothbrush. The Egyptians weren't much better off, with their hieroglyphs that looked more like an art gallery than a practical writing system. It was time to draw a bird every time you want to say, the. Enter the Phoenicians. The ancient world was ripe for disruption, and the Phoenicians were the startup that turned everything on its head. They needed a writing system that moved as swiftly as their ships, something that could keep pace with the fast and furious world of Mediterranean trade. This was not just about writing poetry or chronicling the epic deeds of gods. This was about cold, hard commerce. Trade routes needed tracking, inventories needed recording, and debts needed tallying. In the mercantile melee of the Mediterranean, time was not just money, it was profit. The genius of the Phoenician system lay in its simplicity. Instead of a cumbersome array of symbols representing whole ideas or complex syllables, they pared it down to just 22 characters, each representing a single sound. That's right, folks. Letters you could actually string together to form words. It was like going from a horse-drawn cart to a Ferrari in the world of riding. If the previous systems were a symphony orchestra, the Phoenician alphabet was a punk rock band. Raw, direct, and ready to take the world by storm. But let's not romanticize too much here. The Phoenicians didn't develop this system out of some altruistic desire to enlighten the masses. This was business, plain and simple. They were traders, and in trade, efficiency is king. They needed a system that could be learned quickly, used universally, and scribbled onto anything from papyrus to pottery shards. Plus, with fewer symbols to remember, literacy was no longer a luxury for the elite. It was a tool for anyone savvy enough to wield it. Now, let's talk logistics. The Phoenician alphabet did away with the need for hundreds of symbols. Instead, it was a lean, mean, 22-character machine representing consonants only. Vowels, it seems, were deemed unnecessary clutter, like the silent partner in a business deal. This was a consonantal alphabet, a fact that probably led to a lot of interpretive guessing, but it was light years ahead in terms of accessibility. Of course, the Phoenicians weren't the only ones to benefit from this streamlined system. As their ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, their alphabet hitched a ride. It spread faster than gossip in a small town, influencing civilizations from the Greeks to the Romans. The Greeks, in particular, saw potential in this minimalist marvel and decided to add their own spin by introducing vowels. It was the linguistic equivalent of adding whipped cream and a cherry to a sundae. Suddenly, writing was not just functional, but also expressive. But why does this matter, you ask, as you sip your overpriced latte? Because this was the dawn of a new era. The Phoenician alphabet wasn't just about making trade easier. It was about democratizing information. It laid the groundwork for the alphabets that would follow, including the Latin script that many of us use today. In a way, the Phoenician alphabet was the prototype for every keyboard, every printed book, and every text message you've ever sent. So, the next time you're typing away, spare a thought for those ancient Phoenician mariners. They might not have had Wi-Fi or GPS, but they understood something fundamental about human communication. In a world obsessed with the complex, they found power in simplicity. They took something as vast and unwieldy as language and distilled it down to its essence, a tool that was as nimble and versatile as their ships. And in doing so, they charted a course not just across the sea, but through history itself. And so, riding the salty breezes of the Mediterranean, the Phoenician alphabet spread faster than the latest meme on social media. Picture those cedar ships bustling with everything from luxury goods to everyday knickknacks, and tucked away in the captain's cabin, a scroll or tablet with Phoenician script. A humble yet potent tool for bridging worlds. It's as if every Phoenician merchant was an unwitting ambassador for their alphabet, turning every dark into a literacy seminar. By 800 BCE, the Greeks were taking notes, literally and metaphorically. They saw the Phoenician system and thought, not bad, but we can judge this up a bit. This wasn't just a case of cultural borrowing. It was more like cultural remixing. The Greeks added vowels, those unsung heroes of the alphabet, that turned a string of consonants into something you could actually sing to. Vowels were to writing what seasoning is to your favorite dish. Suddenly, everything was just a bit more palatable. And here's where we smash through a little historical myth that's as persistent as a cat meme. The Greek alphabet wasn't an original masterpiece sprung from the head of Zeus. It was more of a collaboration, with the Phoenicians playing the role of the unsung hero. The Greeks might have been the ones to add the vowels, but the foundation was Phoenician through and through. It's like giving all the credit for a hit song to the singer while ignoring the songwriter. Phoenician practicality made it all possible. The cultural implications of this alphabetic tweak were profound. Suddenly, writing wasn't just for the scribes and scholars, but for anyone who could master this new, more accessible system. This democratization of writing helped Greece blossom into a hub of ideas and creativity. As ideas spread, so did their influence, echoing across the Mediterranean like a catchy tune you can't get out of your head. Plays, poetry, philosophy, all of them took flight on the wings of this new, vowel-enhanced writing system. We often hear about the Greeks as the fonts of Western civilization, the originators of democracy and philosophy. But let's not forget they stood on the shoulders of Phoenician giants. They took a system designed for trade and commerce and gave it a shot of intellectual espresso, fueling cultural revolutions that would ripple through time. It was like upgrading from a practical family sedan to a sleek sports car. Both get you where you need to go, but one does it with a whole lot more style. Meanwhile, the Phoenicians continued their maritime marathon, weaving their alphabet into the fabric of every culture they encountered. The Phoenician alphabet became the ancient equivalent of English today, a lingua franca that transcended borders and bridged communities. It was a tool of trade, but more than that, it was a tool of unity in a world that was all too often divided by language. Now, let's put this into perspective. By the time the Greeks were busy fine-tuning their vowels, the Phoenician alphabet had already made friends in places as far-flung as North Africa, Spain, and even the Italian peninsula. The Etruscans, for example, were early adopters, borrowing the alphabet and passing it along to the Romans. Talk about a game of historical telephone. Each culture added its own flair, but the Phoenician DNA was unmistakable. And here's a little nugget of trivia to drop at your next dinner party. Without the Phoenician alphabet, the Latin script, which we use today, might never have existed. That's right, folks. Every time you jot down a grocery list or type out an email, you're dipping into a legacy that started with Phoenician traders who needed a better way to keep tabs on their purple dye inventory. But while the Phoenicians were busy spreading their alphabetic gospel, they were also facing the harsh realities of the ancient world. They were sandwiched between powerful neighbors and constantly had to navigate the political tides as deftly as they did the Mediterranean's waters. Their cities, like Tyre and Sidon, were rich but vulnerable, prime targets for empires with expansion on the brain. Still, the Phoenicians played a long game. They understood the power of influence over brute force, opting to conquer with ideas rather than armies. It was a strategy that paid dividends, even if it didn't always make the history books. Their alphabetic legacy is a testament to their impact, a silent, enduring witness to their ingenuity in a world that often overlooked their contributions. So, as we sail through the rest of this tale, let's keep our eyes on the horizon. The Phoenician alphabet is just one chapter in a much larger story of cultural exchange, adaptation, and transformation. It's a story that doesn't end with the Greeks or the Romans, but continues to evolve, like a river winding its way through the landscape of human history. And as we navigate through the currents of history, let's set our sights on the economic impact of the Phoenician alphabet, a tool that revolutionized record-keeping and commerce like an ancient Excel spreadsheet. Imagine Tyre, circa 800 BCE, a bustling metropolis where the clang of shipyard hammers harmonized with the frantic scribbling of merchants tallying trades. This was no leisurely Mediterranean cruise. It was a high-stakes game of maritime monopoly, and the alphabet was their get-out-of-jail-free card. In the cutthroat world of ancient commerce, time was everything. Trade routes from Tyre to Carthage weren't just pathways, they were lifelines. Picture this, a network stretching hundreds of miles across the choppy Mediterranean waters, where navigating the sea was as unpredictable as trying to predict the stock market. Phoenicians didn't have GPS, but they had something just as valuable, their alphabet. This system enabled them to jot down inventories faster than a Mycenaean could down a goblet of wine. It was a ledger in a league of its own, a tool that allowed merchants to track goods, calculate costs, and settle debts with the precision of a seasoned accountant. The logistics of these trade routes were nothing short of a Herculean task. The journey from Tyre to Carthage, approximately 200 kilometers, was fraught with hazards, from treacherous storms to piracy that made modern-day corporate espionage look like child's play. But the Phoenicians were nothing if not resourceful. Their ships, laden with everything from fragrant cedarwood to the much-coveted Tyrian purple dye, were the Amazon delivery vans of their day, each carrying a cargo that could make or break a merchant's fortune. Now, let's talk economics. The Phoenician alphabet didn't just streamline communication. It was the oil that kept the gears of commerce turning. By simplifying record-keeping, it allowed for the development of more complex trade agreements and financial instruments. Think of it as the prehistoric equivalent of blockchain technology, ensuring the integrity of transactions and reducing the risk of fraud. Need to remember who owes you for that last shipment of luxury textiles? Just jot it down in Phoenician script and sleep easy, assuming you weren't up worrying about your ship being plundered by pirates. On the flip side, let's not paint too rosy a picture. The alphabet may have been a game changer, but it didn't solve all the ancient world's supply chain issues. Delays were as common as merchant gossip, and ships were often at the mercy of capricious winds and rival city-states looking to score a quick profit by intercepting shipments. It wasn't uncommon for goods to arrive weeks or even months late. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of being stuck on hold with customer service. The efficiency brought about by the Phoenician alphabet helped mitigate some of these headaches. With better record-keeping came better planning, allowing merchants to anticipate shortages and adjust prices accordingly. If you've ever wondered why those purple-dyed garments were so expensive, it wasn't just the laborious process of extracting dye from thousands of murex snails. It was also the cost of navigating the Byzantine logistics of ancient trade. But here's a myth-buster for you. Despite the romantic image of Phoenician traders as master mariners, they were also shrewd businessmen who understood the power of negotiation. Deals were often sealed not with a handshake, but with a document, written, of course, in their trusty alphabet. This wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was about forging alliances and securing influence. In a world where warfare was often the first resort, the Phoenicians wielded commerce as their weapon of choice. Their influence spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before other cultures started taking notes, literally. The Carthaginians, descendants of Phoenician settlers, used the alphabet to build their own mercantile empire, transforming Carthage into a powerhouse that would later lock horns with Rome in a series of epic showdowns. It was the ultimate historical irony. A city founded by traders would become a military juggernaut, all thanks to the administrative efficiencies enabled by a 22-character script. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling over inventory spreadsheets, spare a thought for those Phoenician merchants. They too had their fair share of headaches, but they didn't have the luxury of Control+Z to undo a mistake. Their alphabet may have been simple, but its impact was anything but. It was the engine driving the ancient economy, a silent partner in every transaction, every treaty, and every triumph. In dissecting this tale, remember that the Phoenician alphabet was more than a tool. It was a catalyst for change. It enabled the flow of ideas and goods, transforming the Mediterranean into a cauldron of cultural and economic exchange. It was the unsung hero behind the scenes, quietly orchestrating a symphony of commerce that would echo through the ages. As we sail forward into the next chapter of this saga, let's keep this in mind. The Phoenician alphabet wasn't just a set of letters. It was a bridge connecting disparate worlds. It was the thread that wove together the fabric of ancient society, allowing cultures to communicate, collaborate, and compete in ways that were previously unimaginable. And as we dive deeper into this historical narrative, let's continue to unravel the impact of this unassuming yet revolutionary invention. A story that, much like the Phoenicians themselves, is far from over. As the Phoenician alphabet continued to weave its way through the ancient world, its impact went beyond just trade and economic efficiency. It began to shape the very fabric of society itself. Picture a world where writing was no longer the exclusive privilege of priests and palace scribes, but was slowly seeping into the hands of merchants, artisans, and even the occasional farmer. It was like giving everyone a backstage pass to the concert of knowledge, and suddenly the possibilities were endless. But let's pump the brakes for a second before we start imagining a utopian world where everyone could read and write. The reality was a bit messier than that. Yes, the alphabet was simpler and more accessible, but universal literacy was as much a myth as the idea of the Mediterranean as a peaceful, sun-drenched paradise. In truth, learning to read and write was still a skill, one that required time, resources, and a bit of luck. And let's face it, not everyone was lining up to scribble out grocery lists or pen love letters. For many, the alphabet was a tool for survival, a way to keep track of debts, and deals rather than a ticket to literary fame. Take the city-states of ancient Greece, for example. Here, the alphabet started to democratize literacy in a way that must have seemed revolutionary. The Greeks were not content to merely replicate the Phoenician model. They saw writing as a way to bolster their burgeoning democracies. Athens, around the 5th century BCE, was at the forefront of this literacy revolution. The introduction of ostracism, a democratic process where citizens could vote to exile a political figure for 10 years, relied heavily on the ability to write. Citizens would scratch the name of the unwanted politician on a shard of pottery known as an ostracon. Talk about getting written out of history. Yet, while literacy spread, it was far from universal. Estimates suggest that at its peak, only about 10% of the population could read and write. That's roughly the equivalent of one kid in a classroom of 10 knowing how to unlock the mysteries of the alphabet. So, while the notion of a literate citizenry is appealing, it's crucial to remember that the majority still relied on oral tradition and memory to navigate their world. The alphabet was a powerful tool, but it wasn't a magic wand. But where literacy did take root, it planted seeds of change. In city-states like Corinth and Thebes, the ability to record laws and treaties in a standardized script meant that the power dynamics started to shift. Suddenly, rulers and officials couldn't just rely on the fog of oral tradition to keep the populace in check. Written laws were harder to manipulate, and that meant accountability was on the rise. It was like installing CCTV cameras in a town square. Everyone had to be a bit more careful now that their actions could be scrutinized. And let's not underestimate the ripple effects of this newfound literacy. In the political arena, being able to read and write became a stepping stone to power. Aspiring leaders could rally support with written speeches and proclamations, distributing them like ancient campaign flyers. This was a game changer, especially for those outside the traditional power structures. The alphabet was a ladder, and for those savvy enough to climb it, the sky was the limit. Now, let's debunk another romantic notion. The idea that all this literacy led to political harmony and utopia. Far from it. In fact, the spread of writing often led to increased tensions and political jockeying. In Athens, the famous reforms of Solon around 594 BCE, which included the codification of laws, were both a boon and a bane. While they provided clarity and fairness in the legal system, they also sparked fierce debates and political rivalries. Imagine a Twitter spat, but with papyrus and ink. Clarity in law was a double-edged sword. While it reduced arbitrary rule, it also laid bare the inequalities and grievances that simmered beneath the surface. As writing spread, it also played a role in the rise of populism. Leaders who could articulate their visions and rally the masses found themselves with a distinct advantage. This was democracy in its rawest form, with all its messy, vibrant chaos. Consider the case of Cleisthenes in Athens, who around 508 BCE used the written word to champion reforms that would lay the groundwork for Athenian democracy. His use of written communication helped to unite disparate tribes and factions, forging a common identity that was as much about civic pride as it was about political power. Elsewhere, in places like Phoenicia's own city-states of Tyre and Sidon, the alphabet enabled more than just trade. It became a tool for cultural cohesion and identity, a way to document the myths and stories that bound communities together. In a world where oral tradition was king, the written word offered a way to preserve knowledge and history for future generations. This was no small feat in an era where the sands of time had a habit of burying civilizations whole. Yet, despite its transformative power, the alphabet couldn't solve every problem. Social stratification persisted, and literacy remained a privilege for those who could afford the time and resources to learn. But even so, the mere presence of writing in everyday life was a subtle force for change. It whispered of possibilities, of a world where ideas could be exchanged as easily as goods. It hinted at a future where the pen might just be mightier than the sword, even if that future was still a long way off. So, as we continue our journey through the alphabet's historical impact, let's keep our eyes on the social and political ripples it created. The Phoenician alphabet was more than just a set of characters. It was a catalyst that empowered individuals and reshaped societies. It was a tool of both oppression and liberation, a testament to the complexity of human nature. And as we explore further, let's remember that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, ingenuity, and folly. As we unravel the threads of history, it becomes clear that the Phoenician alphabet's legacy is like a game of historical dominoes, one simple innovation toppling barriers and paving the way for the future. Imagine this. The alphabet, initially just a handy tool for Phoenician traders, eventually became the linguistic gift that kept on giving. It hopped across borders and centuries, influencing writing systems from Aramaic to Hebrew, and even casting its spell on Arabic scripts. It was the ancient equivalent of a viral trend, but instead of dance moves, it spread linguistic enlightenment. The real magic trick here wasn't about cultural superiority or intellectual dominance. Forget the highbrow narratives of civilizations asserting their grandeur through linguistics. The Phoenicians didn't care much for academic accolades. Their alphabet's true genius lay in its accessibility. It was like the T-shirt of writing systems, simple, practical, and easy to adapt. No more hieroglyphic hierarchies or cuneiform complexities. It was a linguistic democracy where everyone, from the humble potter to the ambitious merchant, could partake. Take the Hebrew alphabet, for instance. Emerging around the 10th century BCE, it borrowed heavily from the Phoenician script, adapting it to fit its own phonetic needs. It's as if the Hebrews took a look at their Phoenician neighbor's alphabet and said, "This will do nicely, thank you very much." And so, the Hebrew script was born, a testament to how the Phoenician alphabet's practicality could transcend cultural boundaries. Meanwhile, over in Mesopotamia, the Arameans were busy doing their own remix. By the 8th century BCE, the Aramaic alphabet had become the lingua franca of the Near East, thanks in part to its ease of use. It was the Swiss Army knife of alphabets, flexible enough to be adapted by various cultures, including the Assyrians and Babylonians. In a world where empires rose and fell faster than reality TV stars, the Aramaic script was a model of resilience and adaptability. But let's not sugarcoat it. The spread of these alphabets wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. It was often driven by conquest and coercion, rather than peaceful cultural exchange. The Assyrians, for instance, weren't exactly known for their gentle diplomacy, but they recognized the administrative efficiency that a standardized script could offer. So, while the Phoenician alphabet's offspring spread across continents, it often did so on the backs of imperial ambition. Fast forward to the Roman Empire, the ultimate cultural melting pot, where the Latin alphabet emerged as the dominant script. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, took the Etruscan adaptation of the Greek alphabet, which was itself a Phoenician descendant, and ran with it. It was like a historical relay race, with each civilization passing the baton, refining and reshaping the alphabet to suit their needs. The Latin alphabet became the backbone of Roman administration, law, and literature, setting the stage for its future as the most widely used script in the world. But here's a curveball for those who think the alphabet's journey was a linear progression toward Western dominance. While the Latin script spread across Europe, the Arabic script, which also traces its roots back to our Phoenician friends, was carving out its own influential path. As Islam spread across the Middle East and North Africa, so too did the Arabic script, becoming a unifying force and a vessel for scientific and philosophical advancements during the Islamic Golden Age. It was a reminder that while alphabets can unite regions, they can also be vessels for diverse and dynamic cultures. And speaking of diversity, let's not forget the Cyrillic script, which traces its lineage to the Glagolitic alphabet, a creation of the Byzantine brothers Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century. While not a direct descendant of the Phoenician alphabet, it was nonetheless influenced by the Greek script, itself a grandchild of Phoenician ingenuity. The Cyrillic script went on to become the written voice of Slavic languages, including Russian and Bulgarian, proving that the Phoenician alphabet's impact was as much about fostering new traditions as it was about preserving old ones. So, What's the takeaway from this whirlwind tour through time? The Phoenician alphabet didn't just influence writing systems, it democratized them. It made writing less of a privilege for the elite and more of a tool for the everyman. It wasn't about asserting cultural superiority, but about solving practical problems. It was like handing out the keys to a new world, one where ideas could travel as freely as goods on a trade route. In the grand tapestry of human history, the Phoenician alphabet is a humble thread that holds more significance than its simplicity suggests. It's a testament to human inventiveness, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes start with the simplest of tools. The next time you type out a message or jot down notes, remember that you're participating in a legacy that began with ancient merchants scribbling on scrolls. And so, as we close the book on the Phoenician alphabet's journey, let's reflect on its true legacy. It wasn't about creating a cultural monolith, but about opening doors and bridging gaps. It was a catalyst for communication, a tool for trade, and a foundation for future generations to build upon. In a world that often celebrates the complex and grandiose, the Phoenician alphabet stands as a reminder of the power of simplicity, a cornerstone of global communication that continues to shape our lives in ways those ancient traders could never have imagined. In the twilight of the Showa era, when Japan was still licking its wounds from a global conflict that had knocked it off its high horse, a young prince found himself surrounded by the curious world of marine biology. Emperor Akihito, before he donned the imperial regalia and became the man who'd lead Japan into a new era, was a kid with his nose buried in books about fish. Not what you'd expect from a guy born in a palace, but there you have it. Maybe he found solace in the quiet world under the sea, where there were no political catastrophes or the echoes of war, just the gentle sway of seaweed and fish that didn't give a hoot about human affairs. Akihito was born in 1933, a time when Japan was flexing its imperial muscles. But by the time he was old enough to understand the world around him, the country was in the throes of a post-war identity crisis. Picture a massive economic overhaul, political upheaval, and a society trying to reconcile its past with the new ideas of democracy being thrust upon it. Japan was like a teenager in a punk phase, trying to figure out who it really wanted to be, with Akihito smack dab in the middle of the chaos. The imperial family was treated with a mix of reverence and skepticism, revered because of centuries of tradition, yet scrutinized because, let's face it, not everyone was thrilled about the idea of an imperial family in a modern democratic Japan. Akihito's father, Emperor Hirohito, had just declared himself a mere mortal in a speech that sent shockwaves through a nation that had once considered him a god. Talk about a dramatic demotion. Hirohito's Humanity Declaration in 1946 was like swapping a superhero cape for a suit and tie, and the family had to navigate the tricky waters of public opinion. While Japan was busy rebuilding its economy and infrastructure, with a GDP that went from practically zero to hero in the span of a few decades, Akihito was busy with his studies. He was sent to Gakushuin School, an institution that was practically the Hogwarts of Japan's elite. But instead of spellbooks, Akihito found his passion in fish. Little did his teachers know that this young prince would grow up to publish scientific papers on gobies and blennies, earning respect in the scientific community. Who knew fish could be the ultimate escape from the pressures of imperial life? Fast forward to the 1950, and Japan had a whole new vibe. The country was embracing democracy, denim, and jazz, a cultural revolution that would have made the most stoic samurai raise an eyebrow. Akihito, on the brink of adulthood, was set to become the symbol of a nation trying to balance tradition with modernity. His love for marine biology wasn't just a quirky hobby, it was a statement. Here was a crown prince more interested in the migratory patterns of fish than in the political machinations of his forebears. As Akihito came of age, Japan was hosting the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, a coming-out party of sorts for a nation that had risen from the ashes of war. It was a time to showcase not just athletic prowess, but also technological innovation and cultural renaissance. Akihito, already a well-traveled young man, was seen as the embodiment of this new Japan open, forward-thinking, yet deeply rooted in its traditions. Now, here's the kicker. Despite his royal status, Akihito was something of a rebel in his own right. When he decided to marry Michiko Shoda, a commoner, it sent the imperial household into a tizzy. The match was unprecedented, a departure from centuries of tradition where imperial unions were strictly arranged within the aristocracy. It was like marrying the girl next door when your parents had already picked out a duchess for you. But Akihito and Michiko's marriage in 1959 was more than a royal love story. It was a reflection of a changing Japan, one that was slowly but surely embracing new ideas and breaking free from the shackles of rigid traditions. So, as we set the stage for Akihito's reign, it's clear that he was more than just an emperor in waiting. He was a symbol of a nation in transition, a man who found his peace not in the politics of the day, but in the silent depths of the ocean. And who knows, maybe the fish taught him a thing or two about navigating the choppy waters of public life. As Japan moved from the shadows of its past into the bright lights of modernity, Akihito was poised to lead the way, flippers and all. As Japan stood on the brink of its own economic renaissance, Akihito was poised like a reluctant phoenix, ready to glide over a nation that was about to soar to dizzying heights and then plummet back down to earth. The stage was set for an economic miracle that would make even the most stoic economist's heart skip a beat. From the 1960 through the 1980, Japan's GDP was like a meticulously engineered bullet train, swiftly accelerating from $44 billion in 1960 to a jaw-dropping $1 trillion by 1980. This wasn't just an economic boom. It was a full-blown, neon-lit explosion. Now, let's not pretend this was all due to some divine intervention or mystical alignment of the stars. No, Japan's meteoric rise was fueled by a potent mix of strategic industrial policies, a highly skilled workforce, and a culture that valued innovation like a sacred art form. The country became a powerhouse of technology and manufacturing, churning out everything from cars to microchips, while the rest of the world watched in awe and a little envy. Companies like Toyota and Sony didn't just become household names. They redefined what it meant to be a global brand. But wait, there's more. As Japan's economy soared, so did the cultural zeitgeist. Suddenly, the world was captivated by everything Japanese. From sushi to karaoke, it was all the rage. Tokyo's skyline was like a sci-fi movie come to life, with skyscrapers piercing the clouds and neon lights painting the night like an electric Monet. It was the era of big hair, bigger dreams, and the biggest stock market bubble you've ever seen. Ah, the bubble. A shimmering, fragile thing that promised riches beyond imagination. By the late 80s, land in Tokyo was more expensive than a Picasso at a Sotheby's auction. In fact, the Imperial Palace grounds alone were worth as much as the entire state of California. It was an era where real estate and stock prices were inflated like balloons at a child's birthday party, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. The Nikkei index soared to an astronomical 915 points in December 1989, a number so high it seemed more like a lottery jackpot than a stock index. But as history has shown us time and again, what goes up must eventually come crashing down. Into the early 90s, and the bubble burst with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The Nikkei plummeted, wiping out trillions of yen in market value, and the real estate market crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Japan's lost decade had begun, a period of economic stagnation that felt more like an economic purgatory. It was as if the nation had collectively woken up from a wild party, only to find the hangover was going to last for years. In the midst of all this economic tumult, Akihito's reign as emperor was a curious juxtaposition. Here was a man representing centuries of tradition, yet presiding over a nation that was wrestling with the realities of modern capitalism and consumer culture. It was like trying to balance a teacup on a roller coaster, a feat of royal resilience if there ever was one. While the economy seesawed, Akihito and his family remained a symbol of stability, embodying the enduring spirit of Japan even as the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. And let's not forget the technological revolution that was quietly reshaping society. Japan was at the forefront of innovation, leading the charge with gadgets and gizmos that seemed straight out of a science fiction novel. From the Walkman to the first commercial mobile phones, Japanese technology was rapidly becoming an integral part of daily life, around the globe. It was a time when owning a Sony TV or a Toyota Corolla was a badge of honor, a testament to the prowess of Japanese engineering. Amidst the flashy consumer culture and technological bravado, Akihito's presence was a gentle reminder of Japan's rich cultural heritage. He was, after all, a man who preferred the quiet company of gobies and blennies to the hustle and bustle of stock markets and real estate deals. It was this ability to remain grounded, find solace in the simple beauty of nature, that endeared him to the people even as the nation grappled with the highs and lows of economic fortune. As Japan navigated the choppy waters of the late 20th century, Akihito stood as a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Japanese people. He was a symbol of continuity in a time of rapid change, a reminder that even in the midst of skyscraper-high expectations and monumental economic upheaval, there was always room for reflection and growth. And as the story of Japan continued to unfold, Akihito was there to guide the nation through the tumult, one royal wave at a time. As Japan navigated the choppy waters of the late 20th century, Akihito stood as a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Japanese people. He was a symbol of continuity in a time of rapid change, a reminder that even in the midst of skyscraper-high expectations and monumental economic upheaval, there was always room for reflection and growth. But Akihito had more up his sleeve than just quiet contemplation and an encyclopedic knowledge of fish. He was ready to shake things up, chrysanthemum throne style. Enter Akihito's groundbreaking mission to humanize the imperial image, a task about as simple as teaching a cat to fetch. The imperial family had long been cloistered away, like a living relic of Japan's bygone eras, but Akihito wasn't content with being a mere figurehead. No, he was determined to bring the monarchy out of its ivory tower and into the hearts of the people. He embarked on a series of public appearances that would redefine what it meant to be emperor. Now, let's talk about those public appearances, which were a bit like royal roadshows with a hefty dose of humility. Akihito's tours were a far cry from the pomp and circumstance of yesteryear. He visited disaster-stricken areas, knee-deep in mud and empathy, shaking hands and offering words of comfort to those affected by nature's wrath. His visit to Kobe after the devastating earthquake in 1995, where he donned a simple suit instead of regal robes, was a poignant reminder that even emperors could roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. This wasn't just a PR stunt, it was a cultural revolution. By bridging the gap between the imperial family and the common folk, Akihito was effectively demolishing the invisible wall that had separated them for centuries. The political implications were significant. Here was an emperor who dared to have opinions, who spoke about peace and reconciliation, who questioned the wartime actions of his own nation. It was like witnessing a royal metamorphosis, one part tradition, two parts modernity, and a splash of free thought. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this new direction. The imperial family had always been a symbol of stability, and change, as they say, can be unsettling. The more conservative elements of Japanese society saw Akihito's openness as a slippery slope towards, dare we say it, irrelevance. After all, if an emperor could be seen as just another human being, where did that leave the mystique of the monarchy? But Akihito wasn't losing sleep over critics. He had a nation to connect with, and he wasn't about to let a few raised eyebrows stop him. His efforts to modernize the imperial image also extended to embracing technology. In 1989, when Akihito ascended the throne, it wasn't just a ceremonial affair. It was broadcast live on television, allowing millions of people to witness the historic event firsthand. This was a far cry from the days when imperial ceremonies were shrouded in mystery, accessible only to those within the inner sanctum. Akihito's reign also saw the introduction of the Heisei era, a name that translates to achieving peace, which was more than just a hopeful slogan. It became the guiding principle of his rule. The emperor's speeches often focused on international diplomacy and fostering goodwill, an agenda that was more about building bridges than walls. His trips abroad, including visits to China and South Korea, were emblematic of a new era of diplomatic engagement. Akihito's visit to China in 1992 was particularly noteworthy, as it marked the first time a Japanese emperor had set foot in the country. It was a symbolic gesture, an olive branch extended to a nation with whom Japan had a complicated history. But before we get lost in the romance of this diplomatic dance, let's not forget the political tightrope Akihito was walking. His attempts to foster reconciliation often put him at odds with more nationalist factions within Japan, who were less than enthusiastic about revisiting the past. Yet Akihito persevered, understanding that acknowledging history was a crucial step towards healing and moving forward. And let's talk about the family front, where Akihito's modernization efforts continued in the form of progressive, albeit subtle, changes. He and Empress Michiko broke with tradition by raising their children themselves, rather than leaving them in the care of court officials. This hands-on approach to parenting was almost unheard of in imperial circles, and signaled a shift towards a more relatable, down-to-earth royal family. Furthermore, Akihito's commitment to humanizing the monarchy extended to his interactions with the media. The imperial family started to engage more openly with journalists, a move that might sound mundane today, but was revolutionary back then. The image of a smiling, approachable emperor was a far cry from the stoic, distant figures of the past, and it helped to demystify the institution for a new generation. Of course, with modernization came the inevitable challenges of balancing tradition with progress. Akihito's efforts to usher the imperial family into the modern age were not without their critics. Traditionalists worried that the emperor's approachable demeanor and public engagements would erode the sanctity of the institution. But Akihito seemed unfazed. He understood that in a rapidly changing world, adaptation wasn't just necessary, it was vital for survival. So, as Akihito continued to redefine the role of the emperor, he did so with a quiet determination and an unshakable belief in the power of connection. By stepping out from behind the walls of the palace, he became not just a symbol of continuity, but a beacon of change. And in a nation that was constantly evolving, economically, culturally, and politically, that was perhaps the most valuable role of all. As we prepare to delve deeper into Akihito's reign, it's clear that his legacy would be shaped not only by his words and actions, but by the enduring impact of his vision. The modernization of the chrysanthemum throne was not merely an exercise in public relations, but a fundamental shift in the relationship between the monarchy and the people. And as history would show, Akihito's reign would be remembered as a period of transformation, one that laid the groundwork for a future where tradition and modernity could coexist in harmony. As Akihito continued to redefine the role of Japan's emperor, he became a diplomat with a flair for turning Stargy protocol into a tapestry of cross-cultural connections. It was like taking a centuries-old tradition and giving it a modern twist, much like a DJ remixing a classic track for a new audience. Picture this: Akihito, the marine biologist emperor with a heart full of goodwill, stepping onto the global stage with a handshake that could melt glaciers. His reign saw Japan's diplomatic efforts go from formal affairs to heartwarming gestures of friendship. This was a time when Japan was not just a major economic player, but also a bridge builder in international relations. Akihito's state visits were more than just ceremonial exercises. They were carefully orchestrated overtures to foster goodwill and mutual respect. One cannot discuss Akihito's diplomatic ventures without highlighting his groundbreaking trip to China in 1992. It was a journey that could easily have been a diplomatic minefield, given the fraught history between the two nations. But here was Akihito, offering a symbolic olive branch as the first Japanese emperor to visit China. The trip was a gesture of reconciliation, akin to a heartfelt apology for a past that neither nation could afford to ignore. Akihito's words, carefully chosen and delivered with sincerity, echoed across the halls of diplomacy. "I deeply regret the unfortunate past," he said, acknowledging the wartime aggression that had left scars on both sides. It was a moment of humility that resonated far beyond the borders of the two countries. But let's not pretend that diplomacy is all smooth sailing and sunshine. The intricacies of international relations can be as tangled as a ball of yarn, and Akihito's efforts were no exception. Every step he took was measured, every word weighed with the precision of a jeweler examining a diamond. The political landscape was littered with potential pitfalls, and yet Akihito navigated these waters with the grace of a seasoned sailor, all while maintaining that quintessentially Japanese sense of decorum. As part of his diplomatic odyssey, Akihito also made a historic visit to South Korea in 1998. This was another first for a Japanese emperor, and for good reason. The memories of Japan's colonial rule over Korea were still raw. The visit was a delicate dance of diplomacy, requiring a level of empathy and understanding that went beyond mere political rhetoric. Akihito expressed deep remorse for the suffering caused during the colonial period, a sentiment that was as much about acknowledging past wrongs as it was about paving the way for future cooperation. Yet, the trip was not without its quirks and challenges. The protocols of ancient Japan meeting modern international relations made for some charmingly awkward moments. Imagine Akihito, accustomed to the rigid formalities of the Japanese court, engaging in the more relaxed, sometimes boisterous settings of international diplomacy. It was like watching a traditional tea ceremony unfold at a bustling street fair, each context illuminating the other in unexpected ways. Beyond these grand gestures, Akihito's cultural initiatives at home were equally transformative. He and Empress Michiko championed the arts and sciences, fostering a cultural renaissance that brought Japan's rich heritage to the forefront of the global stage. The imperial couple attended countless cultural events, from no performances to contemporary art exhibitions, signaling that Japan's cultural influence was as vital as its economic prowess. In a country where tradition can sometimes feel as immutable as Mount Fuji, Akihito's willingness to engage with the modern world was nothing short of revolutionary. He supported initiatives that promoted cultural exchange and understanding, believing that these soft power strategies were as crucial as any political alliance. It was a vision that recognized the symbiotic relationship between culture and diplomacy. One could not thrive without the other. While Akihito's reign was marked by these cultural and diplomatic endeavors, it also highlighted the emperor's remarkable ability to connect with people on a human level. It wasn't just about shaking hands or attending state dinners. It was about building genuine relationships and fostering a spirit of mutual respect. Whether he was meeting foreign leaders or chatting with ordinary citizens, Akihito's humility and warmth were unmistakable. It was this personal touch that set him apart, endearing him to people both at home and abroad. And let's talk about the numbers, because what's a good diplomatic tale without a little data to back it up? During Akihito's reign, Japan hosted no fewer than 200 state visits and official meetings with foreign dignitaries. That's a lot of handshakes, smiles, and polite exchanges over tea. Each visit was an opportunity to showcase Japan's vibrant culture and booming economy. But more importantly, it was a chance to strengthen ties and build alliances. But here's the kicker. Akihito's diplomatic efforts weren't just about Japan's image. They were about fostering a global community. He understood that in an increasingly interconnected world, Japan couldn't afford to be an island unto itself. By embracing a more open and inclusive approach to international relations, Akihito helped to position Japan as a leader in global diplomacy, paving the way for future generations to follow. As we reflect on Akihito's legacy, it's clear that his reign was marked by a profound commitment to reconciliation, understanding, and peace. It was a period of transformation that redefined what it meant to be emperor in the modern world. And while there were challenges and setbacks along the way, Akihito's unwavering belief in the power of diplomacy and cultural exchange ensured that Japan's place on the global stage was not only secure, but respected. So, as this chapter of Akihito's story comes to a close, we're left with a portrait of a leader who wasn't afraid to step beyond the confines of tradition and embrace the complexities of the modern world. His tenure was a testament to the enduring power of diplomacy and the transformative potential of cultural exchange. And as we look to the future, it's a legacy that will continue to inspire and guide Japan as it navigates the ever-evolving landscape of international relations. And so, as Akihito's reign drew to a close, the world watched with bated breath for the next act in Japan's imperial drama. It was 2019, and the stage was set for an unprecedented moment in modern Japanese history, the abdication of an emperor. For the first time in over 2 centuries, an emperor was stepping down of his own volition. The last time this happened, the United States was still figuring out how to be a country, and Napoleon had yet to declare himself Emperor of France. So, it's been a while. Akihito's decision to abdicate was steeped in both personal conviction and public duty. At the ripe age of 85, the emperor cited his advancing age and declining health as reasons for stepping aside. While this might sound like a perfectly reasonable explanation to the average Joe, in the world of Imperial Japan, it was a mic drop moment. Traditionally, emperors served until death, which meant that Akihito's choice was nothing short of revolutionary. It was a nod to the modern world's pragmatic view of leadership, recognizing when it's time to pass the baton and make way for fresh legs. The abdication ceremony was a masterclass in blending ancient rituals with modern sensibilities. Held on April 30, 2019, it was an event that combined solemnity with a touch of the surreal. Imagine centuries-old traditions unfolding under the watchful eyes of a global audience, all while keeping the whole affair as understated as possible. No fireworks, no royal fanfare, just a simple ceremony at the Imperial Palace that was live-streamed for the world to see. Akihito, ever the embodiment of humility, delivered a brief speech expressing his gratitude to the people of Japan and his hope for a future of peace and prosperity under his successor. Enter Naruhito, Akihito's eldest son, who ascended the chrysanthemum throne on May 1, 2019, ushering in the Reiwa era. The word Reiwa translates to beautiful harmony, a fitting description for the balance Naruhito would have to strike between respecting tradition and embracing progress. As the 126th emperor, Naruhito inherited not just a throne, but a legacy that Akihito had meticulously crafted over 3 decades. It was a legacy of empathy, diplomacy, and a commitment to modernization that would serve as both a guide and a challenge for Naruhito's reign. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being a modern emperor is no walk in the imperial gardens. The role comes with its fair share of paradoxes and public scrutiny. On one hand, there's the expectation to uphold centuries-old traditions that are as rigid as the samurai code. On the other, there's the need to resonate with a society that is continually evolving, influenced by global trends and technological advances. It's like trying to play a traditional kodo while simultaneously mastering a synthesizer, an intricate dance of old and new. Akihito's legacy, then, is a blueprint for navigating these complexities. His reign demonstrated that embracing change doesn't mean discarding the past. Instead, it's about weaving history into the fabric of the present, creating a tapestry that reflects the full spectrum of a nation's identity. Whether it was his unprecedented visits to former wartime adversaries or his efforts to humanize the imperial image, Akihito proved that the monarchy could be both a custodian of tradition and a catalyst for change. And what of the myths surrounding the emperor's role? The romanticized notion of the infallible monarch is a narrative that has captured imaginations for centuries, but Akihito's reign reminded us that emperors are, in fact, human. They have their strengths and shortcomings, their triumphs and trials. Akihito's decision to abdicate was a testament to this humanity, a recognition that even emperors must contend with the passage of time. Economically, Akihito's reign coincided with Japan's transition from an economic juggernaut to a nation grappling with the realities of a globalized world. The economic bubble of the late 80s had long since burst, and Japan was navigating the challenges of an aging population and a shifting geopolitical landscape. Yet, amidst these trials, Akihito's steady presence served as a reminder of the resilience and adaptability that had defined Japan's post-war recovery. His legacy is a testament to the idea that success isn't measured solely by economic metrics, but by the strength of a nation's character and the unity of its people. As we reflect on Akihito's impact, it's clear that his reign was more than a series of diplomatic gestures or ceremonial duties. It was a period of transformation that redefined the role of the emperor in a modern society. By stepping down, Akihito set a precedent for future emperors, demonstrating that leadership is as much about knowing when to let go as it is about holding on. It was a decision that resonated across Japan and beyond, a reminder that even the most enduring institutions must adapt to remain relevant. And so, as the curtains closed on Akihito's reign, they opened on a new chapter for Japan's monarchy, one that would be shaped by the lessons of the past and the promise of the future. Naruhito, armed with his father's legacy and his own vision for the Reiwa era, embarked on the journey of a modern emperor, navigating the complexities of tradition, diplomacy, and public life with the same grace and humility that had defined Akihito's tenure. In the end, Akihito's abdication was not just a personal milestone, but a pivotal moment in the ongoing story of Japan's imperial family. It was a reminder that the monarchy, like the nation it represents, is a living, evolving entity, one that must continually adapt to the ever-changing world around it. As we close the book on Akihito's reign, we're left with a legacy that is as much about the future as it is about the past. A legacy that will continue to inspire and guide Japan for generations to come.